Unsolved mysteries. The real problem with a small group of people who control these technologies unwatched by public eyes is its potential for great abuse. For example, we can never fully solve any accident or crime and know whether it was an e.g. heterodyned crime or a regular one. Princess Diana's driver could have been e.g. heterodyned and made to crash into the barrier. John Hinckley could have been made to believe that only by shooting President Reagan could he get Jodie Foster to love him. I met a colonel in the Air Force who test flew the new exotic airplanes and who was menticized after discovery of all sorts of corruption with Halliburton defense contracts. False memories were implanted in him and he was made to believe he was married and had a kid with some music star for 2 years. Clearly the capability exists to create Manchurians like John Hinckley. JFK Jr. could have been made to misinterpret the horizon or his aircraft instruments to malfunction. Flight 800's fuel tank could have been sparked by directed energy weapons. All these events could have been assassinations using e.g. heterodyning and directed energy weapons, but we will never know. How can you have justice when one cannot be certain as to whose mind was behind the crime, or even if the jury or judge is being influenced? Clearly the current controls have failed and a major reorganization of the government is justified to regain constitutional controls over these weapon systems in order to restore justice, redistribute the power structure evenly again, and hold accountable high traders and special interest corruption from sidestepping the laws and constitution. The capability for directed microwave weapons and weak magnetic fields for silent assassinations with plausible denial is huge. Microwaves at specific power and waveforms have been shown to be able to cause diabetes through sugar metabolism changes or cancers by breaking a weak hydrogen bond in the DNA. All sorts of medical problems can be created with directed energy weapons besides just frying a person. The days of the CIA hitman have ended and replaced. Thank Reagan for giving them more power with a huge Star Wars initiative to fry a person rather than an incoming missile. It is proving to be the favorite weapon of the corrupt shadow agencies under the executive branch. I think the leaders have misinterpreted the word execute to mean murder and not operations. Stupid alien quotes. We'll tell you who ordered your torture and assassination. It was Colonel Casper. You know, he is like a ghost if you try to catch him. Ha 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 ha. Legal and ethical problems with Tammy's spy mode. In the current hive mind approach, much like quantum experiments, the observer is part of the experiment. Hence, the observer is partially responsible for the actions of the subject that he observes in unpredictable ways. This is truly a legal, moral, and ethical dilemma if it were used by law enforcement. Secondly, the data gathered by Tammy is just the cortex brainwaves and as such represents a perceptual interpretation or purposeful imaginary creation, and hence can't be trusted as accurate in a court of law, even if every person's lifetime brainwaves were recorded and could be played back as evidence. Politics of psychotronics. I want to know what went on behind the scenes with the Reagan/Gorbachev meetings that caused the nuclear missile reduction treaties but instigated the Star Wars defense initiative. Could it be that they created a treaty to develop mind control weapons as others have stated? Did the United States purchase the mind control weapons technology to bail the Soviet Union out of financial collapse and then develop it under the Star Wars defense budget as several historians have surmised? Many have speculated that Reagan's senility was a CIA menticization to keep him quiet about the technology. Bush Sr., being head of the CIA, certainly knows about it and has made many references to it in his speeches. Clinton was a pawn and helped sign non-lethal bills for continued testing of the weapons on the public. He only shouted right-wing conspiracy too late when blackmailed by sexual indiscretions. Bush Jr.'s spokesman has made his knowledge of the weapons quite clear during his threat to the Republicans: "You will suffer in your own private purgatories. Try to sleep if you can." He might as well have said, "Go to hell. Satan will be waiting for you." So the mind control, torture, and silent assassinations are still acceptable criminal behaviors by our leaders to order for personal gains. They either conform to this criminal norm or they will be assassinated like Kennedy if they try to reform the integrity of politics and inform the public. Real-time Nielsen ratings. Since our government is composed of different crime families, warlords, gangs, and mobsters all competing for power, money, and glory, one colonel often does not even know what the other one is up to. More or less could Congress know what the black budgets really fund? One project that seems to have failed or at least hasn't benefited many presidents is the real-time opinion polls calculated by a sampling in the Mind network. It is useful to groom a candidate into office, but it doesn't seem to be successfully used by the commander-in-chief while in office. Like the thousands of others in the United States psychotronic concentration camps, I was denied the chance to vote in the last election, which clearly would not have favored Bush. There may have been enough to swing the very close election had we not been brain-napped, tortured, and experimented on. Stupid alien tricks. To give you a better idea how the intelligence community lacks intelligence, I will share some of the aliens' misunderstandings of me. I use many different names under different circumstances and during different periods of my life. I do this to help me know where I know someone from. I separate my social groups into family, current friends, business, and old friends. My name has evolved in time with the different groups. So I can precisely tell who I am talking to by what name they call me. So one of the demonstrations the alien army like to do is voice transformation. They amazingly could mimic everyone in my family and few distant friends. However, they couldn't get my sister's voice correct for some reason. They would act out verbally abusive scripts using their voices, but they don't have a future in Hollywood. Not only did they get all their personalities wrong, they had every character use the wrong name when they would speak to me. This gave me an idea. I started feeding them a continuous stream of incorrect information. Days or weeks later they would regurgitate it to me and pretend like they had a lot of intelligence gathered already. That was their game. Walk the target backwards in time with their memories using cues. This is a type of memory probing technique. Stupid aliens. Chalk one up for the humans. Human effects weapon testing industry. As difficult as it may be to believe, the United States has an industry based upon the population's inability to believe the horror that random citizens would give taxes to build weapons that would then be used on them in the most dreadful way. With this inability of the people to get involved or investigate, and through a carefully engineered common belief system, the human slave trade thrives in the United States and abroad. Poaching people from all walks of life for the EEG heterodyning and hive mind control experiments is lucrative business. The killing tools of our society have become better at what needs to be said for the population to ignore the problem and easily dismiss these claims. Without your voice and protest actions, more people by the hundreds and not thousands will be tortured to death over a long period of time. Everything is done to an extreme just so it sounds even more absurd when told by the test subjects. Discrediting is the game that has been perfected since the alien abduction stories are wearing thin these days. If the United States and CIA were to kidnap random people to test their M16 assault rifles, people would take notice. The body count would get suspicious. But by torturing and killing people through an advanced directed energy system that few understand or know about, that just kills the mind with the body to follow slowly behind, nobody sees the immediacy of the atrocities and threat to the legitimacy of the government. Public service announcement. I know I will sound like a braggart, but my education in today's dollars cost over $1 million. The government has destroyed $1 million brain. There is not a single person living with my exact pedigree or education. My entire life of hard work, hundreds of all-nighters, and enormous strain to better myself and invest in my mind has ended up as a decimal point for the CIA/military weapons statistics. I would love to do a public service message for kids. Drop out of school, live it up, do drugs, because there is a certain chance all your hard work will land you in the Culture program and your personality will be altered, your happy outlook on life diminished, and your savings taken in a period of a few years while being tortured. They don't teach you that while growing up in America for obvious reasons. I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched C-beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in the rain. Time to die. Replicant baddie. Blade Runner. Government homicides. Not very sporting to fire on an unarmed opponent. I thought you were supposed to be good. Replicant baddie, Blade Runner, 1982. I get told all the time when I discuss this book to people, aren't you afraid the government is going to kill you? With the best education money can buy, why was I not taught that the United States executive branch is corrupt and we accept this? I was taught to believe in the Constitution. I pledged allegiance to the flag every day in grade school. I was taught about all the valiant soldiers who fought to create a country with low taxes and less tyranny. We hold our hands over our hearts and listen to the national anthem at every sporting event. We put support our troops ribbons on our cars for a war we assume is necessary. We fly American flags outside our houses and buildings. I bought into the whole thing hook, line, and sinker. I was never taught to fear the management of the country because they are there to serve us and protect us. The truth needs to be taught in history books so people's expectations aren't as high for their stay in this land. The very people we put in charge to manage the country's affairs don't know the Constitution and certainly aren't there to protect it. George Bush's NSA domestic spying is just the tip of the iceberg. Since the politicians are powerless to create laws that protect us and certainly powerless to enforce them when broken by other government branches, we should just come to grips that the American dream is over and our country's values were stolen by crooks posing as CIA and DOD. Our right to freedom of speech has been nullified by information and psychological warfare tactics. Scream fire and people will come to the rescue. Scream rape, fewer people will respond. Scream government torture and assassination, no one will come to your rescue. Nor will it be published, nor will a major news medium pick it up. Try publishing it on the internet, disinformation agents will flood the search engine topics with garbage. Each of us is in an architected information bubble, isolated through informational noise and overload. Our right to privacy has been voided for many decades. The politicians purposefully lag 30 years or more behind current technology in lawmaking. So for example, the Electronic Eavesdropping Act is far outdated and only applies to simple technologies. Reading brainwaves, clearly the most intrusive act government could do, is and will not be covered by these laws, nor are video camera transmissions. Privacy is an illusion too. Our right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness can be taken away at any moment if your weapons test and death lottery number comes up. Manipulation of events and people are common practice as well. You may have been caught up in a military exercise and never know the true reason why you got cancer, for example. I suspect we should expect more encroachment on our right to bear arms too. We should expect excessive double taxation as well to support the ever-growing war machine. Through our trust in our government officials' truthfulness and competence, we have allowed our country and its ideals to be turned into the very thing that we used to fear from communism or an autocracy. The war machine's culture is one of an autocracy. Of course their values will seep into politics if they aren't deprogrammed after leaving the machine. It is extremely detrimental and dangerous to have a president or any politician who has had a career in the CIA or DOD if they haven't had time to reintegrate back into society. Right to a fair trial does not exist anymore. If people can be targeted to fail lie detectors, judges and juries can be manipulated, then justice is void. If people can be targeted by the CIA or military assassins and this is acceptable, then justice is void. If people's brains can be killed or menticized, but the body kept alive for a while, then justice is void. Menticide is a pseudo-legal loophole which the government uses to disable and kill people. Making someone kill themselves is just a clever loophole they believe. They are just redefining what self is. Overlapping someone else's mind using e.g. heterodyning to commit violence against others or self is obviously a criminal act by the government psychic assassins and not the person who owns the body and brain. But without spelling out the obviousness of this in a law and having a separate army to enforce it, these idiots will continue to destroy American ideals and values. That was irrational of you, not to mention unsportsmanlike. Replicant Batty, Blade Runner. TSS services and CIA drug experimentation and subsequent mind rape and death is not different than scum who use Rohypnol to drug a girl then rape her while incapacitated and then worse by killing the girl to make sure there are no witnesses. This is now common practice by our government to develop weapons and more tricks for the CIA. Is there any doubt that international criminals have taken control? Just remember, if you served in the military forces, you supported these criminals and their intentions by believing in their lies. Don't blame yourself, how could no? Secrecy and knowledge compartmentalization allows for these kinds of crimes against countrymen and humanity to go unchecked and flourish out of control. The denial that people have about mind control technology is like the denial people have that they won't get addicted to a drug. It can't be that bad. I would notice. I could resist it. It doesn't work like that. You cannot resist it, and most people unless trained wouldn't even notice it. Your very essence, your brain electricity and neurotransmitter synaptic signaling, is being modified. You can't feel it being done because you think you are in control. You have an illusion of choice if you are e.g. heterodyned by an experienced psychic spy. Can you see how easy a takeover was with this technology? No one is allowed to discuss this in public now without being silenced or discredited. I didn't know that when I happened upon the technology. Alien introductions. When the psychic parasites introduced themselves to me on that spooky Halloween 2004, they tried many introductions, but the one that seems most appropriate was, "We are the Borg. Resistance is futile. Your uniqueness will be assimilated. You are food for thought. And by the way, you need to slow down your thinking and think in complete words." Well, we know that aliens don't think in pictures now. I can only estimate how many people must be tortured by the directed energy weapons who never figure out why their body is falling apart and in pain all the time. Of the 1,000 people I have interviewed, about 25% were people who did not have the synthetic telepathy. They were not told each and every pain that was to occur or what government program they were being tortured under. I always ask the question of these victims, how did you figure it out? I would never have thought that my brain was being fed electromagnetic energy in such a precise manner that any programmed pain could be inflicted. I would have just come to the conclusion my nervous system was degenerating. The common response was, the pain occurrences and timing was too regimented and my limbs would twitch and almost move on their own like I was possessed. I went to the internet to do some research and found thousands of other people with the same story. Think how many people suffer the duration of their lives without ever finding a physical cause for their pain. It is staggering that these non-lethal nervous system disruptor weapons need so much suffering for their effectiveness. Data. Psychotronic slavery in the United States. The miserable have no other medicine but only hope. Shakespeare. Measure for Measure, Act 3, Scene I. Better than hope is a plan. The sociology of post-civil rights and post-Jewish Holocaust is an interesting one. I have had the opportunity to meet many hundreds of psychotronic slaves from all walks of life, age, sex, and religion. The mind control and slavery experiments are truly conducted at random, on the most part composed of such diverse groups as children, nuns, upper-crust wasps, and ghetto blacks. The types of people that seem to adapt to their new slavery status as human animals for DOD/CIA weapons testing are those groups that have had a heritage of being enslaved and children who haven't had enough freedom and self-determinism to miss it. Afro-Americans cope like they did before the civil rights movement. They usually create songs and protest peacefully like Martin Luther King in the many untelevised nationwide protests. Their expectations are not as high as Caucasians who believe and are taught they are entitled to freedom in America. The mind control data collectors often refer to themselves as handlers. I assume this is because they view themselves as animal handlers, training their pet projects. The Jews that I interviewed seem to not look for political solutions, almost as if they aren't surprised fascism followed their people to America. They also are confused by the two-face policies enacted by the many divisions of government. The United States openly supports Israel, but then why are they torturing and putting Jews in these secret psychotronic concentration camps? They often don't realize it is random, and religion is not the discriminating factor in their decision this time round. The Muslims have the most anger about the unrecognized torture using this weapon system. Without access to the mass information streams, their stories cannot affect the American citizens' popular opinion. Like myself, many of the Muslims said that the agents introduced themselves as a satanic cult. This is done worldwide these days and clearly added to the Muslims' view that the United States is the great Satan. The European Parliament even said that these weapons should be banned because they are only useful in causing war and suffering. The tension and anger in the Caucasian group is also nearing a breaking point, since peaceful protests have had little effect on making this a national and worldwide topic of debate. If and when violence breaks out, the news covers it up quickly as a crazed person or a domestic terrorist. The public never gets to hear the pattern of stories behind the acts. The Christians in the psychic torture concentration camps tend to be peaceful thinking too. They believe strongly that God will save them and that the United States is clearly on the path to hell. From the daily attacks and torment, they often get an apocalyptic view of the future. There does seem to be an inordinate number of women in the secret prisons. It may be that they are more outspoken about what is happening and men tend to cope silently. But the women mostly agree that they are targeted because the agents expect that they are weaker and less likely to commit violent acts against federal and military targets. Following this pattern, intimidation stalking is practiced at a far greater rate on women targets than men, furthering the proof that the zombieloids are part of a cowardly group. Quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it? That's what it is to be a slave. Replicant baddie. Blade Runner. Maintaining the loyalty of the regime. How did the United States agencies weed out all the high-ranking Russian double agents in the FBI and CIA back the 70s and 80s? They periodically check into the minds of agents to read their loyalties. Almost every government worker with a clearance is on a fast rotational sample into their minds. This global human surveillance system, TAMI, has been readily expanding. The United States has a secret black budget of $42 billion that was leaked recently. At an average salary of $75,000, this pot of money could have a payroll of 560,000 agents of the United States government. How many of those are involved with this offshoot agency who handles the plausibly denied assassinations using Satan and truly unconstitutional mind-viewing surveillance is unknown. But one could estimate it to be anywhere from the early rumor of 400 people to 15,000 people in order to match and outdo the Russian psychic army. The Unabomber was just another mind-controlled patsy. This information is postscript the writing of this book. I found a connection between Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and CIA mind control programs like I suspected existed. Apparently, they mind control a patsy to do their assassinations for them. I suspect the scientists to whom Ted sent bombs were connected with government grants dealing with some piece of the war machine that they didn't want further research into. My private research into virtual reality and EEG-controlled robots was probably one reason why I was chosen as the next patsy. Dr. Bird is one of the rare ex-military heroes in this story. He morally turned down working with Army intelligence when his mind-influencing research went black. He openly has discussed EEG telemetering and influence and found a LA Times article that describes Ted Kaczynski's participation in the CIA mind control experiments, Moonstruck at Harvard. Sad that yet another innocent person is in jail for CIA mind control crimes. But the politicians are just too ignorant and stupid to pass any laws to spell out that this is unconstitutional and illegal. I take a personal interest in his case because it is so similar to mine. I lived in the same dorm that Ted Kaczynski lived in, Eliot House, at Harvard. I recognized his mindset, the evolution of mind control, isolation, then fear of technology. When I found out that there is actually a strong connection with the Moonstruck CIA mind control program, which validated my suspicions, leaves no doubt who the criminals are in the government. Similar links can be found with the Oklahoma bomber. People should be angry at the shadow government, not at the mind-controlled patsies that do their traitorous dirty work. The FBI are so simple in their textbook methods of investigations. They stop investigating once they find the body that committed the crime, in this case the body that mailed the bombs. They don't follow through to find whose mind did the killing. They never really have solved any of these mind-controlled murder cases correctly. We have the innocent person's body imprisoned, and the guilty murderous mind still free. Where is the justice in that? They just move to another target to continue their murderous streak and silent assassinations with plausible denial by using so many levels of indirection. Before I was grabbed for these brutal experiments, I was looking into joining the FBI's white-collar and high-tech crime division. I would have been good at it seeing that I have correctly solved at least 8 of their cases in less than 2 years of research, with no authoritative power to interview, and no budget. One must ask if it is incompetence or purposeful cover-up ordered from the top. Now this is my strong opinion on the topic. The FBI has been manipulated by the executive branch throughout history from Nixon to Clinton. Many victims are led to believe the FBI are the ones stalking them and torturing them. First off, if they were involved deeply they would not have allowed a federal building to be blown up with their agents inside by the Oklahoma bomber. My handler's third identity after Russia and China was the FBI to redirect my anger. Too obvious a decoy. I have no doubt that fake FBI badges may be used in these manipulations and that the CIA or other sub-intelligence agencies have infiltrated the FBI with a few corrupt agents just like the California Highway Patrol and other places, but I saw the woman FBI agent who helped catch the Unabomber speak at the college at which I was teaching. She was clueless and uninformed as to anything beyond police detective protocols. Even though the FBI was involved in investigating terrorist phone numbers dialed from my father's house, they were still just being manipulated again into following protocols so that if the agents succeeded in turning me into another Ted Kaczynski they could say look the FBI found a lead that he was connected to Al-Qaeda's or something like that. The public being stupid and seeing it speculated on the news would of course jump to the predetermined conclusion that there was a connection. The end. I get locked up for a mind-controlled EEG cloning crime unjustly like Ted Kaczynski or put to death like the Oklahoma bomber and as the CIA manual states, disposed of by local authorities. That's how the games are played. Good thing the DOD and CIA are so predictable, unchanging, and uncreative with their plots. Plus, I must have faith that there is hope in regaining constitutional control of our country and without the good intentions of the Justice Department all is lost. Creating mind-controlled assassins that is terrorists and psychos. Having nothing, nothing can he lose. King Henry VI, Act 3, Scene 3. It is very important that I preface what I am about to convey to the public so as I am not set up for more trauma and injustices by government agencies. What I am about to tell is merely to educate the public and the world as to the ways in which the United States preferably assassinates people these days. I am not a threat to commit the acts that I am about to describe. I am trying to help any do-gooders still left in the FBI or other positions of the Justice Department by explaining in clear terms the psychological methods the CIA and others use to create domestic terrorists and the reasons behind it. This information may diffuse future psycho outbreaks if it can reach other targets before they act. Like I mentioned before, I have not had a chance to interview Ted Kaczynski to find out the details of the mind control experiments conducted on him and to test him with the angles of eye gaze psychotic movement and a questionnaire I developed to quickly identify targets of e.g. heterodyning mind manipulation. One form of assassination technique the crime family, CIA, like to use is to instill a hatred towards the scientists, retired military personnel, and the like who may leak these details of this weapon to the public and make them aware of the grand scam. The best kept secrets are hidden in plain view. That is the case here. The stakes are high for the traitors in the government because the public outrage and distrust would topple the power structure or lead to a state of emergency from the riot outbreaks. So, they use patsies and complicated behavior and opinion manipulation tactics. For example, they attempted to turn me into a Unabomber-like assassin through extreme torture and planting the idea to get revenge on the most outspoken scientists and colonels in the field. Now, had they succeeded, they would have sent a strong message to all those who work on directed energy, e.g. cloning weapons to keep quiet and never work on neuroscience again if you leave a government project. They also would have plugged potential leaks even if those people would have never talked. And in order to kill two birds with one stone, I, like my Navy/US/UK compatriots that were knocked off after leaving a secret project, would also have been silenced due to a suicide-like attack mission to end my suffering and get revenge, or imprisoned and possibly kept in solitary. As the CIA scripts say, the target after committing the crime will be disposed of by local authorities. This technique has been used many times throughout history and they just keep getting better at it. Like I advised earlier, everyone who has left a secret project might be able to save their lives if the information that the CIA/DOT are trying to contain is leaked. I wish I had known this and done it myself before I was targeted. It is pointless once you are targeted and it would just be used against you. John Alexander and Dr. Delgado are clearly pointed to the most frequently in the literature and some disinformation websites created by the agency. They have very deep involvement in the development of these weapons and it is obvious why the agency wants them eliminated before they get old, senile, and start telling stories. The question I have for Ted Kaczynski is why did he choose the targets that he did? Why did he believe he could stop this by disabling those particular scientists? What government connections did those scientists have in their past or present? Were they civilians working on science that the Pentagon secretly restricts but who can't exactly put out a list of prohibited knowledge acquisition? My conjectures have proven extremely accurate during this investigation and I believe I already know his answers. To further this tragic and incredible true tale, I will reveal why I didn't become another Unabomber in order to assassinate selected scientists and colonels that they tried to program me to. 1 year almost to the date before my abduction and brain napping, my father told me that FBI agents visited him and asked about 2 phone calls 2 years prior that were to known terrorist camps in Oregon. They came with their guns showing from Boise, Idaho's FBI office. The phone calls were from both his personal office and his wife's office in their home according to the phone records from the telephone company, the agents said. Now I must remind you that I come from the perfect all-American family with only doctors and lawyers for all my relatives and many worked in the Navy. My uncle is the CEO of a major financial institution that issues paychecks to the military. My father's property is guarded by dogs and the house is many acres away from a security gate with an alarm system, and they have a daughter that is home all the time. It would have been impossible for someone to have broken in and dialed 1 phone call from each phone line. Given a background check, the FBI should have immediately realized that the records had been tampered with. Who has access to the phone networks at the base trunk? Only government agencies could have altered those phone records. When I was assaulted, psychotronically imprisoned, tortured, and attempted to be programmed, it was immediately obvious to me that an agency was planning a setup. So had they been successful at turning me into that psychopath, they could also have leaked to the media that my family had been questioned a couple years earlier with regards to a terrorist cell. Nice cover-up, eh? Honestly, had it not been me they would have succeeded. I must credit the immutable values that my educational institutions instilled in me and my singular model of reality that has never wavered. But, I am only one survivor. There are thousands of others in the United States that could be triggered into perceived terrorist attacks given any command if they are not separated from the killing signal. No government agency has even lifted a finger to stop this nor the media to expose it. I and others have vowed to do everything in our power to expose the criminals in the government. I am personally offering a $50,000 reward and immunity to anyone who will testify and finger their commanders. It is a very unfortunate trend in our government that both Congress and the Justice Department have been marginalized in their influence and autonomy. Without giving Congress an army of their own and direct access to all black ops projects, technologies, and strategies, we should not expect that they can help prevent the inevitable conclusion of this 50-year trend line. The Justice Department is supposed to be independent, the third pillar to stabilize a federal government from devolving into tyranny, authoritarianism, and some other form of fascism under a familiar name. There are laws to prevent the CIA and NSA from operating in this country due to McCarthyism. We never learn and history repeats itself. Without the scientific expertise of DARPA scientists and high-end military sensor systems, how can the FBI expect to prove this case to the public assuming they operated honorably and autonomously? In addition, the FBI have somehow been usurped under the executive branch and been illegally commanded and used by presidents like Nixon and Clinton. Integrity, honor, and honesty are rare qualities in the current system of controls. There are several other techniques of behavior modification and mind manipulation that the psychic assassins and conventional brainwashers use to create assassins, because when it comes down to it, they, as a group, are too cowardly to find anyone in their agency to perform the hits themselves. Of course, the plausible denial through many levels of indirection and high technology is a plus for those cowering in the shadows. These criminals, who can be linked all the way back to the commander-in-chief, do not want to be caught with beyond reasonable doubt connections through the chain of corruption. Why mind-controlled assassins? First, like in the movie Manchurian Candidate, people of the same race as the country whose leader the United States is targeting can more likely get closer to them. Secondly, it is a way that these rogue agencies rationalize how they are creatively getting around laws such as the United States cannot assassinate foreign leaders. Instead, one level of indirection somehow makes it legal in their small minds. They think assassination through modulation of neurotransmitters in someone else is not linked back to their intention. Also, the overdone plausible denial that the person was crazy seems to always work. They really need a new act and some better script writers. It is a great way to get countries to war against each other and bring instability to regions like the Iraq/Iran war and Israel/Arab and India/Pakistan conflicts. We look like the good guy by simply providing weapons and pretending we support one side or the other. Of course, it often backfires when the countries figure it out and then go after the instigator. Why are people who work for a DOD/CIA project such a security risk after they leave? Well, Russia and possibly China have the mind-reading radar. So killing ex-employees of secret projects ensures that their minds can't be read and secrets leaked. So all current employees and ex-employees are at risk for Satan-style assassinations. I know of a victim who lives near me that was working for the Jet Propulsion Laboratory when they decided she needs to be tortured with psychotronics. She is still alive. So if you haven't made the mistake working for the government yet, don't. You will increase your chances of avoiding being thrust into hell. It doesn't make you immune, because after all they must not allow the statistics to be too convincing and have an obvious pattern, but the data seems clear enough from the 500 sample points I have. The making of a Unabomber. The similarities between Ted Kaczynski and myself are too coincidental to be written off. The agents chose someone from the same profile that worked so successfully before. It is a good thing the machine is so uncreative and predictable. So my guess is they used the same techniques on him that they used on me. Here are the steps involved in the psychological programming that the CIA uses to create Unabombers, Oklahoma bombers, and domestic terrorists. Hopefully this knowledge will defuse future bombers. After the ultra steps of programming and the biocommunications weapons data is collected, they progress to the final stage, which is to eliminate and further discredit their psychotronic hostage. The preferred method is to use them to attack targets of their choosing. Clearly the FBI should be angry at the CIA/DOD for killing many of them by sending the Oklahoma bomber after a federal building. Many of these mind control weapons test victims thoroughly believe the FBI is behind it. Even 2 ex-FBI agents who are test victims believe the FBI is behind it. I don't. They try to first direct my anger at the Chinese government, then the Russian government, then the FBI. Traditionally there has been an animosity between these two groups in the government. The CIA views the FBI as a bunch of dumb glorified cops with none of the technology that they have. The FBI views the CIA as a bunch of criminals with no policing authority. Creating the psychology to make a programmed assassin, CIA terminology, has been perfected over the decades from the Kennedy assignation to the Unabomber. It is a very advanced mix of technology, psychology, and acting out scripts. The psychological strategies are truly astounding in these operations. Everything is geared towards plausible denial. The entire operation of testing and tortures hangs on one thread, and that is the majority of the population will not comprehend or believe the scale and brutality of these biocommunications weapons tests. They must be able to tell the mass news agencies with some evidence that the person has a history of mental illness and that's why they did what they did. That story is usually well received and the FBI, and people are content with that answer. It's simple. The truth is the world is far more complex and the games of belief system manipulation are a pure science. With just a combination of wireless torture and the inability for the target to get their story out and believed, leads to a frustration and panic at the discovery that everything is controlled in the United States and the constitutional system was stolen many decades ago. People handle the situation differently. Most run to the police, FBI, or even the White House lawn thinking they will find help. Instead, that just begins the process of creating a mental illness track record to be used against them later. Next, the handlers isolate their project using several methods. Isolation is necessary to further the delusional thinking without feedback from other people. Isolation also acts like a sensory deprivation chamber and increases the biocommunication signal strength through the phenomenon I discussed previously. The hypocrisy overthrew democracy but took its name. The secrecy surrounding this project, Tammy, is incredible. Clearly the public would be outraged if it knew Americans by the thousands were being tortured and killed for development of military and CIA weapons and that their brains are being spied into on occasion, not to mention that a thought-reading echelon-like project was well underway to automate the whole process, a clear violation of constitutional rights in every case. But that is the way American government has always conducted itself since World War II and Project Paperclip, which smuggled in hundreds of Nazi scientists. It usually takes about 20 years before the documents are released under the Freedom of Information Act. If there are any survivors, the current president apologizes to them. This is just the pattern and the way our government lies without any punishment to them or justice to the victims. Just remember that America was torturing thousands of people, when it said it had to go into Iraq to save the people from torture by Saddam. Remember that when Bush went to China to ask them to be nicer to their people, the shadow government was busy torturing thousands in Iraq and thousands in the United States and a few hundred in other countries with peace shihatronics. Then after we went into Iraq, we torture and kill lots of Iraqis, all in the name of democracy and freedom. Sad how easily people forget. After having experienced the potential of this weapon to be used to torture entire populations without end, I assure you that I rather die in a nuclear blast than endure pure pain without relief of death for years. The United States will not sign the UN ban on mind control weapons nor other international treaties. Russia even proposed the ban. If the United States doesn't have these weapons, then why not sign the treaties? Who is the real threat to the world? Who has more weapons of mass destruction than any other nation? And we somehow justify invading other countries out of fear they have them. It's pretty easy to see the shell game. Is fear of pain worse than pain? Do people fear death because they fear the pain involved with death? Then making the public obsess with terrorism while torturing thousands of its own people with pain weapons, seems like the worst thing any government could do to its own citizens. Walking them to gas chambers like the Nazis did would be more humane. To try and get a grasp of how far behind civilian researchers are, I contacted many top neuroscientists in academia and microwave communication experts around the country. Less than a handful were even aware of Dr. Lin's work at the University of Illinois, and the very well known abroad, and published by the World Health Organization microwave hearing effect. Russian scientists coming to this country have commented on our population's ignorance of bioelectromagnetic non-thermal interactions. How could such important medical research be suppressed? It is a combination of the power of DOD funding, and systematic suppression of knowledge by other organizations. Another one of my heroes, a futurist and famous entrepreneur, Kurzweil, wrote a book called The Age of Spiritual Machines, which I thought to be an insightful look into one possible future. However, most people have not taken into account the political trends and e.g. heterodyning mind control technology when prophesizing the future. Rather than building costly robots and giving them consciousness, we are trending towards creating humbots, human robots, and removing the souls of men. It's an unfortunate turn for the worse in terms of an interesting productive future of technological innovations and their meaning for free-thinking humans. Some interesting interviews. All the people on which are being weapons tested endure enormous, unending suffering that takes a toll on their mental and physical health, so I preface the stories with that context, but there is a funny side to the mind games that are played with people. My interest in physics as a child evolved out of magic. The challenge of trying to figure out how an illusion is performed without being told was a thrill that has stayed with me for life. I have become quite good at it, as there are nearly no black boxes for me to reverse engineer anymore, from electron scanning tunneling microscopes to some of the highest-end top-secret weapons systems. Plus, this is a good time for a break from the macabre, morose truth of our currently dilemma in Americans' history. Stupid alien tricks. One guy from Taiwan was tricked into believing that there were tiny, invisible agents of the Taiwan government that could slip under doors, fly around, beat him up and speak into his ear. He describes the acts of these tiny, almost invisible agents in great detail. A judge in the Philippines thought that little dwarfs were his friends who he heard and would tell him how to rule on his cases. You can see why people come to these conclusions. Yes, they sound crazy. They are just incorrect with what they were led to believe. The perceived speech and agents behind it are real but can be located anywhere on Earth. However, the agents are all the United States paid and not connected with the local security agencies that people from other NATO countries are led to believe. One of the reasons many targeted people believe that the unseen people behind the attacks are small or dwarfs is because the voices perceived from the synthetic telepathy and microwave hearing effect are often very high, like the people are on helium. I don't know what causes this. If this book manages to gain any notoriety in the press or public gossip at large, most in the divisions of government that I brazenly reprimand will be scratching their heads and wondering whether I am telling the truth. Most in the CIA/DOD/FBI/legislature are clueless and trained to ignore people with these claims without thinking or educating themselves about it. Even an assistant Harvard professor recently published a book called Satanic Panic after interviewing 50 people for it. They were outraged at her conclusions, but she is trained in classical psychology and ignorant of these high-end physics weapons systems and the history of inhumane testing on large numbers of the public. She has accidentally done a disservice to our community by using her status to perpetuate the programmed belief of her community. Creating delusional thinking. The strategies for creating delusional thinking are also cleverly complex, but the simplest method is for the EEG cloned handlers to implant an idea hypnotically, overtly, or subliminally in such a way as to make the target believe they came up with the idea. Then the handlers reinforce that path of thinking. With no other sources of reality to error correct, the project can be lead into extreme beliefs and actions in order to seek revenge, to save the country or human race, or to alleviate the constant psychological and perceived physical torture. In my case, after it became clear I wasn't prone to delusional thinking nor easily programmed to assassinate the usual targets that they suggest to the projects, they tried to use the same psychology that must have triggered Ted Kaczynski. Like I said, I have not had an opportunity to interview him yet to see if I am right. The next targets that were chosen were exactly the same group as I remember reading about Ted's case: scientists and military personnel who worked on these weapons systems, technology, or psychological techniques. The names are unimportant, but the target group is of interest here. They are trying to use the cover story of psychopaths to assassinate people who have certain knowledge and expertise in this field and might be used as witnesses in the psychotronic treason trials, with the additional benefits of slowing civilian progress on these discoveries, and of course disposing of the target by local authorities. The truth is, Ted Kaczynski was not the mind behind the crimes of which he was found guilty. He should be deprogrammed and released from prison immediately. After the psychotronic torture investigations and hearings. If it turns out after congressional investigation, people like Colonel Alexander had part in the conspiracy to test on and torture thousands of Americans or maintain that secret, he and many others will be charged with treason. Colonel John Alexander helped organize the Council of Foreign Affairs, which formed the Joint Non-Lethal Weapons Directorate under Marine budget. By classifying radio frequency weapons under the non-threatening title of non-lethal weapons, they have lumped weapons of torture in with rubber bullets, tasers, and glue guns. The Council of Foreign Affairs recommended that all non-lethal weapons be tested on men, women, and children. Who would donate their children for testing? In my investigations, I found several children being tortured by these weapons. Entire families destroyed and barely able to function under non-stop microwave hearing harassment and psychotronically induced pain signals. This is nothing short of criminal and treasonous behavior in a democracy. While I agree with many of Alexander's views, he is limited in his strategic thinking when recommending psychotronic space-based weapons as a solution. He says in one interview, that if the United States doesn't weaponize space, others will. This will lead to space wars that will lead to space being a military battlefield littered with space mines, debris, and particle waste, making it unusable for continued commercial ventures. In his novel with Tom Clancy, Non-Lethal Weapons, he shows his willingness to deceive the public. He talks about an M device that stops bullets from sparking when the firing pin hits the metal that causes the gunpowder to ignite. He claims no one knows how it works. This one discovery of the uses of controlled energy is the foundation of which led to an imbalance of mad, mutually assured destruction, through nuclear missiles. Directed energy weapons can knock out the electronics and guidance systems or stop the explosive from igniting so that it doesn't continue into nuclear fission, which is needed as a precursor to fusion. This is why all new silicon chips have rad-hard specifications. During the investigation, we should expect records to be destroyed and shredded to further the cover-up. Many of the scum will be found in the CIA. The Deputy Chief of Staff for Intelligence in the Army said of the CIA, "They are the biggest assembly of liars and thieves this country ever put under one roof, and they are an abomination." P.300 Psychic Warrior, David Morehouse. Colonel Bearden is another outspoken person on this technology. He was trained in Western physics but speaks and writes about ridiculous explanations in a very non-traditional vocabulary. I can only image he is a confused psychotronic victim himself, or part of the group tasked to spread bad physics and disinform the public. Nazi Germany. Is the United States making the same mistake Nazi Germany made by starting wars on too many fronts? Why are we attacking people around the globe with these weapons? First, the weapon's effectiveness is based on language and culture specifics, even though Satan's interface is not. The other reason is that they need to keep any statistical anomalies of mental illness and popular delusions from standing out in one geographical area. So the instigation of hatred for the United States is partially intentional and partially accidental. We have Bush telling China that they are evil for torturing their people. We have Dick Cheney provoking Russia recently. We have Bush call 4 different countries the axis of evil. We the French who can't stand us. And the list goes on. Nazi Germany made a similar mistake by starting too many wars on too many fronts. Judges controlled. I have interviewed so many people that I can recognize all the variations of the weapons testers' scripts. Just in case people doubt what I say when I talk about that the justice systems have been marginalized like Congress, through the existence of this weapons system without constitutional controls. A judge in the Philippines was just recently relieved of his duties because he believed he was psychic, let his little dwarf friends make the determination of guilt, and became a believer in the Book of Revelations, which he quoted often before trial. His name is Judge Florentino Floro, presiding over a court in Manila. The reason he believes he has dwarf friends is that the synthetic telepathy and microwave hearing effect is often perceived by victims as high-pitched voices that sound like they are on helium. He is about a quarter way through the mind control experiments and clearly has no clue what is being done to him. My handlers love to brag about how many doctors they have destroyed who couldn't figure out how it was being done to them. Subliminal messaging. Buckaroo Banzai is a spoof on evil aliens that have taken control of the United States. When the heroes put on their special glasses, they see subliminal messages on top of billboards and other places that say obey your government. Do not question authority. Conform. These experiments on humans since the 60s have been misinterpreted or metaphorized differently by almost everyone and inspired countless movies. Once you are awakened to the brutality and psychological manipulation tactics of the so-called shadow government or evil aliens, whatever you prefer, you see how the drones are controlled as they go to and from work and watch countless hours of the hypno-tube to learn what their opinion is supposed to be. When you are that drone, it is a happy sheltered bliss. But your life and goals are all based on false purpose, assumptions, and trivialities that if you knew would leave you empty. That is the zirconium with which the alien crooks replace the diamonds of true freedom. If you can't tell the difference, you will value it just as much until you try to cash in on it. Desperately needed legal modernizations. Amend Constitution to include freedom of thought. Amend right to free speech to include preventing government from purposefully drowning out truth with disinformation campaigns. One of the most credible sources of admission to the existence of these weapons besides the general that stated, "That's a sensitive topic" when presented with evidence and questioned about it, is the original document of the Space Preservation Act before its modification and subsequent passing. See Appendix A with a copy of this document and note how the elimination of the phrase psychotronic and mind control weapons be abolished from space was removed from the final version. For a country that respects freedom of speech, and more importantly freedom of thought, it seems obvious that we need these additional protections, especially in light that they are being used to manipulate the political process and the justice system. Time is running out in stopping a dark Dostoevsky-like future. The Electronic Eavesdropping Act desperately needs to be updated to include video transmission and brainwave activity, not just electronic listening devices. There is an imbalance of forces in the three-pronged government due to the sly power junkies and their technology in the executive branch of government that threatens to undermine the checks and balances and safeguards intended by the designers of this country. Bounty on their heads. There is a bounty on the heads of these corrupt agents, subcontractors, and military leaders that are testing and using this technology on American citizens. It keeps growing. Currently, I am offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to the successful prosecution of anyone involved in these activities. Go to the website www.thematrixdeciphered.com to leave information. So if you are involved and want immunity from prosecution and a hefty reward, you will come forward to testify against Ultra program members and government psychotronic abusers. Strategy of controlling societies both in the United States and abroad. There has been many strategies published by the war colleges about how to use informational warfare tactics to control a society. The Russians have had similar strategies published since the 70s. The basic principle is to control the people of influence and the information streams. You only need to control about 10,000 people to do it extremely effectively in a country like the United States. More evidence of the cover-up of microwave effects. Even a thorough and superbly written report on sterilization techniques for food preparation written by the FDA astutely commented on the bizarre lack of human and bacterial effects of ionizing and non-ionizing microwave radiation. We are bathed in microwaves from cell phones, to satellite telemetry, to direct TV. Why the blackout? The reasons and research is too scary for the population to know about. Remember the mobile phone panic that ensued after some reports on significant increase of cancer risks? Telecom stocks fell in half. Well, there is a more diabolical motive for suppressing the research in this area since the DoD is very active in microwave weapons and their biological effects. Government crimes. As unbelievable as it may sound, these torture and mind control, Ultra-like, human experimentation programs involve far more than just tests as the name implies. Using some obscure laws in a loose interpretation, the DoD is allowed to perform non-consensual weapons experiments on the public at random. This is just a formality. They would do it anyway and justify it like President Bush has with secret NSA spying. It is in the name of national security. Besides breaking all the codes in the Geneva Convention and Nuremberg codes by torture script testing, they have attacked whistleblowers ignoring whistleblower protection laws. They have many attempted murder violations and successful murders using the mind control weapons. They break the subliminal/hypnotic practice laws. They flagrantly and boldly break stalking laws. They have caused enormous damage to victims' personal wealth, health, and property during these tests of unending duration. They have committed many acts of murder and violence using other people's bodies. Then of course, they are breaking eavesdropping and privacy laws. They have falsely imprisoned thousands of people in psychotronic prisons. But of course, if all was known, they have committed treason beyond any reasonable person's interpretation of the word. The list could go on for several pages. Amazingly, local and state police are clearly not sophisticated enough to understand these complex crimes. The FBI does not have the scientific talent on staff nor the expensive equipment to competently investigate this. Several of their own that I have interviewed have even become victims of the program. The former head of the LA FBI and a special agent of international terrorism. They are very outspoken, but of course their testimony is suppressed like the thousands of others. Are you scared yet? DARPA scientists and other agencies have been instructed to keep out of military exercises. Who's left to stop them? Possibly, an independent Congress Commission task force is the only hope without another country's intervention. I have never been political and never believed in conspiracy theories. But like in the movie The Matrix, it is so unbelievably pervasive and difficult to describe the complex electromagnetically architected world of psychotronics. You have to see it for yourself to believe it is going on. Anti-psychotronic theory. Prevention and solutions to brain-interfering technologies. The truth is out there. X-Files. In the X-Files solution, they mention that a new race immune to the effects of the black oil is being cloned from alien biomaterial and human ova. This race will avoid the eventual mind enslavement. When translated, this would mean that the agents, whose cover story is evil aliens, are cloned into the new race of cyber hive mind hybrids. The justification for brain napping the population and putting them on the Tammy mind surveillance network is to make sure no other countries are controlling or spying into their minds. However, as with most Hollywood interpretations of the psychotronic Holocaust, it incorrectly describes who the enemy is. In this case, the so-called immune race is actually the mind slaves. They are immune because they are already infected by the black oil. How and why movies and TV series like The X-Files or Outer Limits are created to subtly tell an unspoken truth is beyond me. I wish I understood why hints for the justification of the evils of the government are somehow conveyed to the mass programming media. Is it to clear their conscience or arrogant mockery? Or maybe it is a discrediting tactic used against those who dare come forward to speak about it. Jammers, detectors, shielding, oh my. The vaccine against the black oil. The black oil is symbolic of the black sciences and the electromagnetic signals that are forced into those mind-controlled or zombified by Tammy, mind, or Satan. The evil aliens in the X-Files was symbolic of the Russians or the United States Department of Defense, and the timeline for takeover is a reference to the bioelectromagnetic weapons arms race we are in. I speculate that the secret vaccine that the X-Files solution speaks about is a bioinformationally incoherent signal so that people's brains don't learn to interpret an EEG cloning attack signal. The crack that the CIA sold to black neighborhoods supposedly to fund the Nicaragua rebels served a dual purpose, and that is creating a whole new generation of psychics to catalog and clone. Crack and methamphetamines cause damage to the dopamine reuptake receptors, thereby leading eventually to psychosis. As I mentioned before, amplification of electromagnetic signals occur at much lower power levels with synapses flooded with excess neurotransmitters. The Air Force documents I discovered for research into non-lethal weapons was testing for neurotransmitter release under different microwave frequencies. This research is either another method of nervous system influence, or they are looking for an electromagnetic way to flood the brain with neurotransmitters rather than by natural or chemical means to increase EEG cloning effectiveness. I have not been able to validate that the Prozac craze, SREs, serotonin reuptake inhibitors, has any effect on the increased effectiveness of Tammy or the electromagnetic influence of those neurons involved that use that neurotransmitter. However, higher levels of dopamine are very much desired for the voice-to-skull, synthetic telepathy, to be effective. It takes much smaller nudges electromagnetically to create word recognition or amplify thoughts. As a bonus, people with increased dopamine levels would be cake to discredit. It can be done to anyone even within average dopamine levels, but slightly higher power levels are required. Since the beam widths from the large fields of phased arrays are still very broad, the potential exists that several people in an area would learn the same signals, and that would be problematic to the secrecy. This is also why identical twins, couples, and entire families end up being targets if they live together. Scrambling the informational coherence of the biocommunication signals. Like how Star Trek defeated the Borg, shields need to be modulated in order for the signal not to be informationally coherent to a brain. The adaptive algorithms will adjust to any stable frequency domain background noise. This is a form of Fourier filtering. The adaptability appears to have a 6th degree of freedom function. So a semi-chaotic changing modulation of electric and magnetic fields should stifle the forced brain learning and insertion of the sixth sense. Their adaptation requires a pattern that they follow to filter, so it needs to be led continuously to chase a white rabbit of noise. This is the basic theory behind scrambling the signals to the target brain, which will over time unlearn how to interpret the signal with this additional noise. Psychic defenses and war games. The brain mapping has limitations. The kind of neurological information that is cloned is constrained due to bandwidth and resolution limits. Many test subjects incorrectly describe that their invisible attackers can see through their eyes and then falsely conclude that microchip implants have been placed on their optic nerves. Only the higher level cortexes are mapped onto the psychic observer, like the audio and visual cortex, for example. They can see only your mind's eye and not the raw output of the optic nerve. So if a target knows they are being spied upon, they can imagine false images that do not correlate with the actual optical view and thereby transmit false data back to the psychic spies with some practice. Similarly, the audio cortex can be misrepresented by imagining false sounds or conversations. However, one cannot block real audio input from being gathered because the raw output from the cochlea can be measured in the EEG called the BER, Brain Auditory Evoked Response Test. More stupid alien tricks. It is a fair comparison to call these psychic soldiers chimps. When they are panicking their victims, to whom they say they are going to cause a heart attack and a stroke, they literally thump on their chest and stand on their heads to cause the sensation of increased blood pressure in the brain. The thumping on the chest feels like arrhythmia and skipped heartbeats. These dumbasses aren't even Neanderthals, they never evolved to humanoids. National defense lie. More disconcerting in these experiments that have been marketed to the black budgets as national defense, is that there is no defensive action about these weapons. If the government were truly trying to protect its citizens, they would be building superconducting shelters within the nuclear shelters they already have for the citizens. There are several high-tech defenses against neurological weapons that they are not sharing with their bosses, the taxpayers. With our own money and resources, we are covertly constructing these shelters in the safe houses that will be popping up around the country and world. For more information on zero-emission Tempest shelters, visit the website www.thematrixdeciphered.com. Defeating non-lethal ads, PEP, and rubber bullets. I am a scientist for civilian defense, not to be confused with the Department of Defense. I help protect the people from the Department of Defense. Protests and demonstrations have become painful and dangerous for those who still wish to have a democracy. Here are some defenses against the tyrannical federal forces. A mylar umbrella would deflect some of the microwave and laser energy necessary to create these pain weapons and stun weapons. The umbrella could also serve as a shield for the water guns used at demonstrations too. With a Kevlar backing, the umbrellas would also serve to stop .22 caliber bullets. Earplugs will prevent nausea created by ultrasonic acoustic weapons. Infrasound weapons can be lessened by sound-absorbing anechoic cones. If you are protesting peacefully like at the World Trade Organization conference in Seattle, expect rubber bullets will be used, and bring your motorcycle helmet and thick leather garb to protect yourself from the few over-exuberant bouncers, accidentally accepted to the police academy, who are unable to professionally control their emotions. Stupid alien tricks. We are shooting a sonic bullet at you and hitting your brain and heart. Houses creak and make noises which the zombieloids hear through your ears. Did you hear that? We missed. Now we are going to shoot you in the brain, which does lots of damage. One of the cloners presses their finger on their head. Did you feel that? Stupid aliens. Brainwave tracking evasion. A possible secondary reason drugs are such a concern in our society is not just the detriment to the individuals that become addicted and thereby are unable to take care of themselves, or even the secondary crimes that take place because of the poverty associated with drug use and the desire to reacquire a particular mental state. It could be that people are identified by a brainwave signature and tracked in this way as described by patent number. Drugs may change the brainwaves enough that their unique brainwave signature can't be recognized by TAMI for tracking or monitored by the Echelon-like system for thoughts with current artificial intelligence capabilities. It might also be that the signal that every human in the world adapts to and integrates in their neural network as a sixth sense is unlearned, and they therefore fall off the global human surveillance grid and outside TAMI's influence. So creating a scarecrow by recording and replaying your brainwaves on a dummy might confuse one type of tracking technique. Pain weapons, fear of pain, of death, not of death itself. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. FDR's first inaugural address. Franklin D. Roosevelt. Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once. Shakespeare. The next generation psychic warfare. Denial of service attack. The developers of this biocommunications weapon have approached the hacking of the human mind. See Science Channel special Spies Are Us, just like a rogue computer hacker. Every analogous computer hacker's method has been tested, developed, and practiced on worldwide citizens. The denial of service attack, as it is termed, has brought down major computer companies' websites like Amazon and even Microsoft. It works by hacking then zombifying thousands of computers anywhere in the world. They then begin to request information from the website simultaneously and thereby bring the web servers to their knees, and therefore they cannot service real customers. In the equivalent hacking of the human mind, several connected minds or just their voices piped into a target. Either they use their own voices or transform them into the target's voice. The target begins to have difficulty filtering all the questions and conversations, especially if they are using his own internal sounding voice. It brings his productivity and clarity of thought to a new low level. A human cannot survive under this condition, either to maintain a job or operate as a military leader. Trojan horse. A Trojan horse is a computer program that acts just like any other useful utility but has malicious code inside that is also run at some specific time. The comparison to the CIA MKUltra programming of assassins or Manchurian candidates is very appropriate. This is the programming I went through. They haven't changed much of it since the 1950s, so I won't detail here. But the idea is to take a sociable, well-educated, connected person and create hypnotic or EEG clone trigger signals that will cause the person to commit some action at a specific time once the Manchurian is in the proper social setting. See the appendix for a CIA document that describe practicing on American politicians. Ironically, the test of whether they succeed will happen on June 14-17 of 2006. I am meeting with many members of Congress and their assistants to discuss this topic and what can be done to stop the military's practice on the United States citizens. I'm not worried. If you knew the incompetence of the United States government and military as well as I do, they have a 99% chance of failure. Tripwires and unique hashing IDs. Know thyself and you will have an immunity to many kinds of mind hacks. This good advice is equivalent to a diagnostic algorithm used to detect hacks called tripwires. If a program is altered by a virus, the unique encrypted hashing ID is changed. If you notice that any of your perspectives and capabilities have changed, suspect an infection. This can be the saccadic eye movement frequency, a perspective change like disassociation, or emotional associations to ideas, words, or people for example. The neural programming techniques have become quite sophisticated, but I will only consult to other countries about the details to help them protect their populations and sovereignty. The fitness function of countries' political systems must play out without cheating and using these very anti-democratic methods to cheat. Only by allowing the search space of different possibilities of optimal governmental forms to play out without influence can the world determine truly what works best. Worms and viruses. Worms in the cognitive modeling world are implemented through memes. Memes are introduced to the populations or subcultures through social information streams. This can take the form of TV advertising, programming, or movies. It can even be an infiltrated group of agents that can introduce a worm. Cultural mind viruses and worms are difficult to distinguish. I practiced non-malignant mind viruses which I coined pings of social networks by creating interesting truths or misinformation to see how far in social networks the information would travel. Any fad or common belief that spreads can be included in this category. One very popular belief is that if people hear voices without electronic devices, that they are crazy. Another could be a detrimental fad like the gangster look with baggy pants that begin at the knees. If you are a gangster, you would want to be able to run away from your crimes, and this fad clearly prevents that. Buffer overflow. Another very successful but complex hacking method is called a buffer overflow. In computer science, this means that the input stream overflows the memory space allocated to input and begins to write into the executable space. In mind hacking, it is done with levels of logic and information. Information is presented in such a way as to require the target mind to maintain a large set of logical inferences in order to determine the truth of the statements. It is like a chess game where you need to think many levels deep and remember all the possibilities. If you can't, you will make a logical deduction or inference error and consume that piece of information as truth. There are many other forms of hacking that are practiced, but that gives you a good idea how the games work. Now, let's look at the defense and how to hack the hacker's mind. In an EEG cloning lock, the attacker has the advantage of anonymity, surprise, and brainwave filters that shield some of their thoughts from the cloner to the target. However, every system has flaws and the filters are far from perfect. Learning to extract information from the attacker can be just as effective as their interrogation techniques, both traditional and non. Traceroute is a utility to try to find out where the hacker is located. It can be difficult because hackers can bounce their information stream off many different computers all around the world before reaching the target. Similarly, the scatter stealth radar used is almost undetectable in terms of direction of source and due to synthetic aperture and beam steering techniques. However, accessing the attacker's mind and tripping them up with emotion and verbal cues can be done. In addition, traditional internet research pays off immediately. The psychic war games will increase in complexity. Since the EEG cloner attacker, if human, is linked to the perceived target brain signals, it is possible to use cognitive model simulations to mimic the supposed target's brain waves and in fact reprogram the attacking human or simulated model accordingly. This is hacking the hacker's mind. This is theory only. The United States and Russia do not have this capability yet. See Scarecrow Tactics for more detail. Hacking the eye tracking interface. Knowing how the eye tracking interface is laid out would allow a counter-attack by forcing the heterodyner's eyes to various menu points. Remember, during cloning and heterodyning, the attacker is usually more susceptible to your brain amplifications than you are to theirs. It is a two-way street. Denial of service attack. One of the duties of a psychic warrior or the simulated ELISA cognitive model sentence stimulator is to be able to endlessly engage the target in useless banter. The strategy is to be as controversial as possible. Try this technique with someone you know. By being offensive and disagreeable, people have difficulty walking away from the conversation or remaining silent. With enough practice, you will have developed the most important skill in a voice-to-skull electronic harassment attack. This method, using microwave hearing effect and synthetic telepathy, will degrade the productivity of the target enormously and, as one treacherous colonel put it, drive a target crazy with voices. Imagine, if you can, a conversation that you cannot walk away from, a conversation where any voice pattern can be mimicked, even your own internal voice, and where the urge to respond is amplified. This kind of attack mimics the symptoms of schizophrenia exactly. Mental illness is how the military has traditionally and illegally disposed of undesirables such as disobedient soldiers or whistleblowers, and now in ever-increasing numbers, the randomly selected weapons test subjects. The movie V is for Vendetta isn't all that far from the truth. Enemies of the state are being created by the tens of thousands due to torture and government experimentation in this country and worldwide. We have been wronged in the worst way. Nothing short of a new transparent government ruled by the people is our goal. The movie reminded me of my own brutal torture by the government. The population has been electromagnetically and psychologically doped by the shadow government. They have been placed in a system that keeps them complacent and focused on the unimportant details of their existence. The devil is in the details. I offer thanks on behalf of the true Americans to the NSA agents that proudly and rightly came forward to alert the United States population of infractions of privacy ordered by a president who can't even recite the Constitution. Where did our standards go? To make sure that the American public couldn't prove he was a silver spoon-fed glide-by, he had the Secret Service confiscate his academic records at Yale.
Lucid dream interrogations. To see how the subconscious will react under certain scenarios, dreams are manipulated to place the subject in situations where they are forced to continue the dream sequence. This gives some insight into what situations the subject has been in before and predicts how he might react. People usually don't remember their dreams very well, so dream interrogations are a subtle way to probe someone's mind without them becoming suspicious. Dream manipulation is also a very powerful tool to program an individual by subconscious associations. Repetitive nightmares in connection with a political candidate, for example, can obviously change a person's opinion whether rational or not. The subject can be put into the state that one experiences just before they wake up. In this state the subject is questioned like the way children question their mothers to get a yes from them when they are half awake. Musical interlude. A strange odyssey you have embarked upon, isn't it? The secrets that lie in the bowls of unmarked government labs are repulsive to say the least. I thought that I would take the time to share a gift with you before we journey onward. I wanted to share the insight that all that we know is made up of music, harmonies, and resonances. We are part of a cosmic symphony, energy in traveling and standing waves. One scientist even took the cosmic background radiation pattern and transformed it into the sound spectrum to hear what the universe sounded like since its birth. Ironically, it sounds like a mother's scream that is giving birth to a child. An analogous experiment I conducted was to transform my brain waves into the audible spectrum and listen to my thoughts. You will be surprised by what the music of the mind sounds like, and you can learn to control it. Eye tracking interfaces. Tammy, Satan, and Mind use eye tracking to control the interfaces. Eye trackers work by bouncing an infrared light off the eyeball or by imaging the pupil of the eyes. These interfaces make it simple enough for even a chimp to use these weapons systems. I found in my quest into the psychological community's historical research papers which postulates that schizophrenics can be identified through the saccadic eye movement frequency. Incredible how much the psychological community has been both used and duped to further the cover-up. If they were to acquire the help of current psychotronic hostages, they could look into the saccadic eye movement frequency modeling the expected number of eye gaze changes with multiple people. They could also see that the movement of the eyes using an eye tracking correspond to exact angles and frequencies of someone who would be using an interface like I describe. But the mathematical sophistication of most psychologists is lacking to demonstrate and prove what is obvious to us who know the systems in abuse. Plus, if these tests were conducted properly, the heterodyne operators would simply go silent during them. A portable eye gaze recorder worn all the time with the visual scenery overlay would be required over a longer period of time to demonstrate and reverse engineer the menu-driven interfaces to the experimenter's satisfaction. See Hacking the Hackers for how to control Tammy/Satan operators' eye gaze and use their visual interface against them. Extracting information with brain printing. The brain print is an invention that is admissible in court. It demonstrates whether a suspect recognizes an event. Uncontrollable neural circuits fire if an event is recognized. With remote EEG readings, mental images can be presented to view the brain print guilt or recognition response. I practiced a technique similar to brain printing in order to extract the names of my assailants. Flashing letters and name fragments at high speed with our shared visual workspace, I could feel when they recognized or panicked from the word fragment. It is a subconscious response when images are presented quickly and very difficult for one to learn how to control it. Like cracking a combination, I cycled through the various possibilities until I gathered the highest probability responses and tested them further when they had their guard down. This same technique can be used for facial recognition. By morphing different human faces at a rapid rate, one can use the brain print technique to stop on faces that the EEG heterodyne mind or traditional EEG probed mind recognizes. It may be their own face or someone they know. As an example, visual word presentations based on recognition response. Hacking the mind. This is easier than a brute force password hacking program because of the feedback. It is like safe cracking. One can listen to the tumblers fall into place. UNC some response. Christopher Evans higher response. Chris Evans lower response. Christian Evanson higher response. Kevin Christensen higher response. Kevin Christian highest recognition response from the feature set of brain printing. Biopharmaceutical remedies. Higher concentrations of neurotransmitters are required to effectively perform EEG cloning at safe energies. Due to the increased amplification at the synapses, it requires less electromagnetic energy to nudge the brain into specific entrainments. There is an artificial dopamine neurotransmitter called L-DOPA. A subject could increase their susceptibility to electromagnetic influence by taking this, which is temporary and reversible with no permanent damage. Similarly, if the pharmaceutical companies could come up with a dopamine repressor or blocker, psychosis, whether electromagnetically induced, naturally occurring, or caused from damage to the reuptake mechanisms, could be cured. It would at least make the energy required to induce synthetic psychotic symptoms using modulated neurotransmitter release more detectable. Knowledge is protection. Choose life. I chose something else. Quote from a career military personnel whom I interviewed, and probably unbeknownst to him, the movie Train Spotting. Besides the technological protection methods I describe in this book against CIARHIC, Gultra, and psychic warfare experiments, the best immunity you can have is the knowledge in this book. Some of the most important data they are collecting from these brutal experiments on people relies on the fact that a target does not know what is happening to them. They are collecting effectiveness statistics before and after knowing of the existence of the weapon and programs. To protect your friends and family from this horror, give them this book to read and understand. Then they won't be useful for these experiments. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Reduce your risk, rid yourself of secrets. If you have ever worked at a secret base or on secret technology, you are at risk of being silently assassinated like myself and my colleagues in order to minimize the risk of leakage. This is often the rationalization in their twisted minds. If I could go back in time, I would have divulged all information in untraceable ways to the world, since that is what I am sure lead to my colleagues' assassinations and my tortures. Once the secrets are out, they will have no reason to kill you. Be careful that it is untraceable so that they can't pursue legal retaliation. Use spoofed email addresses and multi-rooted cloaked IP addresses, or just drop it in the mail to foreign embassies or conspiracy websites. The beautiful thing about mind manipulation technology is that you can't ever be sure whether you are giving a false confession due to memory implants or forced speech. Of course, you could always pull a President Reagan and not remember due to EDM, electronic dissolution of memories. My physical torture waned over a period of 2 weeks after I finally gave in to revealing what I knew of interest, and the whole ordeal mostly ended on its anniversary of Halloween 2005. This has allowed me to regain many of my mental functions in order to write this book. I did not publish under the pseudonym, The Saint, to protect myself from government retaliation. I have been very outspoken at conferences, rallies, and organizational meetings. I am sure that I am on every watch list invented by the conspiracy agencies. I published under the pseudonym because of the stigma attached to being tortured, raped, and brutalized. Most rape victims keep quiet even though 1 out of 3 women are raped in their lifetime. Someone needs to teach other governments to deprogram the CIA mind control assassins, to flush out double agent that are using hypnosis, split personalities, and EEG heterodyning to pass their polygraphs and brain printing technologies. Hopefully designs of zero-emission Tempest standard labs and shelters will proliferate. If the state-of-the-art remote mind melding and CIA interrogation tactics and psychic defenses against them are known by everyone, perhaps this technology will be turned over to the people and regain constitutional controls. The goal is to make this weapon useless through education, thereby accelerating the time frame that the military/CIA will declassify and release the information to the public, so all the beneficial uses of the technology can come to fruition. According to Air Force scientists working on the weaponization of the technology, they plan to keep it secret until the year 2030. By that time, most if not all of the test victims should be dead, tortured to death for the remainder of their lives by the automated system. Stupid alien tricks. When I speak the truth and get upon my pedestal to preach, the aliens like to say, "Bite your tongue." Followed by trying to force my tongue out of my mouth while they chomp down on their teeth. Evil aliens are so immature. Warnings of mass mind control side effects. Like with any psychoactive drug, the long-term effects of neuron amplification through microwave induction or other means, will render an individual dependent on the increased stimulus. The brain's chemistry will adapt to compensate for the extra pushes that it gets from the external electromagnetic energy. If the entire population were to be put onto the TAMI network, they would become dependent on the signal since birth. If the signal were suddenly removed through a space war against the satellites or ionospheric heaters, the people would turn into zombies, unmotivated and blissfully and ignorantly compliant, more than they are now. Like Brad Pitt said in the movie Fight Club, they would become as cattle. They would be easy to subdue and herd. That is a nice built-in military fallback mechanism that some will experience should they find ESR, MRI, and superconducting sanctuary. Signs of psychic spying and espionage. A psychic spy generally doesn't need to be too careful these days about with whom they EEG heterodyne because the capability is not very well known and people are still in disbelief of its existence. But in the not too distant future they will need to be more careful, for those in the know will be watching for the signs. A psychic spy will need to practice remaining still and their eye movements will need to follow the target's eye gaze naturally. A psychic spy who sits in front of computer monitors in a comfortable chair will find themselves out of habit rocking back and forth as many of us do. This causes a heterodyne target to rock their hips back and forth like a fidgety young child while they are standing. Although being able to control the target's eye movements is important in surveying a room, it is also detectable by those trained to observe this mixed will. All a target needs to do is try to stare at a fixed spot for a duration of time. Normally you can keep your eyes steady on that point. With one or more heterodyned minds, you will naturally get multiple urges to move your eyes in the direction of any of the other heterodyned people who are usually looking at monitors. More people in the hive mind, the less likely they can synchronize their ability to stare and gaze at a point. The other reason this is so difficult for the psychic spies to do is that their computer interfaces are driven by infrared eye trackers. Additionally, many people can hear a very artificial-sounding tinnitus from the microwave energy. The tinnitus can be a very loud, steady multi-tone square wave generated above 10 kHz or as in my case it sounds either like a Star Trek computer with a full range of pinging and bleeps or a 3.2 Hz science fiction-like phaser sound. If the auditory cortex is not mapped correctly, the target will hear crackling and hissing instead. Supposedly in the case of pure EEG cloning where the target is uninfluenced, then she/he won't have any of the aforementioned signs. However, this is much more difficult to do for a psychic spy since their mind needs to be more flexible and follow the target's brain entrainments completely. If the target thinks quickly, they cannot lock on in this mode very successfully unless there is an exact match already in the mind database. Glitch in the Matrix. A machine for every man, woman, and child? That sounds like the machine to me. Morpheus, the Matrix. One way one knows if they are being heterodyned is a thought, a visual after image, or voices repeated several times. This is a technique to synchronize the two or more EEG patterns. Everyone has to be on the same wavelength, pun intended. A snapshot of the visual workspace, mind's eye, can be captured, held, or replayed at a later time. These events are the so-called glitches in the matrix, a necessary side effect of synchronization. Controlling and reading every person's mind requires a program specifically with their cognitive configuration. This is the rationale behind the EEG cloning and cataloging operations. There is truly a machine for every man, woman, and child working behind the curtain of secrecy. Password protection. With this type of psychic surveillance, nothing is private, not even your thoughts. Since the illegitimate and illegal powers that be are using this surveillance method treasonously on their countrymen, we must now cope with new problems. In order to protect your passwords and access to your encrypted information, you need to protect your passwords from yourself. Get a random password generating program that masks the password from your own eyes. These programs that are used mostly to store the tens or hundreds of passwords one need to access various financial, email, and other accounts on the internet also prevent this kind of password stealing. You only need to know one password to access the main encrypted database which is stored locally on your computer. So it would be very difficult for these spy agencies to steal your passwords and access or modify your accounts from another location. They would need to physically break into your dwelling to gain the data. Angular modulation of radar reflective surfaces. To disrupt the synthetic aperture, full-spectrum radar and imaging techniques, changing the reflective direction of the radar signals makes it difficult for them to adapt to the environment. Using material as simple as mylar, metallized plastic film, loosely surrounding a shelter with a fan blowing changes the deflection angles of the radar. It only works for a limited frequency range, but reduces the effectiveness of their imaging and influencing techniques. You can think of this technique as similar to stealth technology using M-radar dampening material, sharp deflection angles, MRI/ESR field gradient disruptors, and electron gyro frequency noise generators, scalar interferometry distorters and superconducting magnetic mirrors. Changing the specular reflection angles of the incoming radar signal through mechanical modulated plates will change the radar signature enough to throw off some automated tracking algorithms. Super shields. An alchemist friend gave me a recipe to help us deflect the witch's hypnotic spells. He said to use a smidgen of yttrium, a dabble of barium, and a pinch of copper in the ratios of 1,2,3. Smelt it in the fires of Vulcan at 1000 degrees Celsius to forge a superconducting shield which when cooled by the breath of Zephyr to 77 degrees Kelvin will protect us from the witch's hexes and spells. Superconductors have the special property of being a perfect magnetic mirror. This is why a magnet will float on top of them. For magnetic brain readings at Lawrence Livermore Laboratories they had to use a superconducting shield to block the external noise for their SQID readings. A superconductor slab creates an electric current that exactly opposes an impinging magnetic field. Research into thin-film superconductors will eventually yield cheap and affordable scalar radar and magnetic resonance shields. But if the evil aliens have selected you for torture experiments, then a rather expensive superconductor chamber with electric field disruptors may be your only refuge. Perhaps our political leaders will wisely decide to super shield Congress and the White House to avoid undue electromagnetic influence from the conspiracy or foreign governments. Of course, blackmail will always be effective. Juries and judges will someday need their chambers super shielded for the same reasons. Dispelling myths. Thanks to the MIT professors and students who worked to dispel the disinformation agents' much promoted aluminum tinfoil beanies myth, which were claimed by movies and websites to protect one from the directed energy weapons and brainwave reading. It turns out that the aluminum acts like an antenna and actually enhances body resonance signatures in the suspected FCC-allocated military bands. However, many have gotten relief from the M-radar noise that causes symptoms from mild discomfort to outright torture by grounding mylar-shielded rooms. See the guide on radar, scalar interferometry, hypnosis, electron spin resonance disruptors and shielding in the appendix. The source of the killing signals. Interesting to note that ionospheric heaters have popped up all over the world. Arecibo, Puerto Rico, built 1953 to 1960. Fairbanks, Alaska, HARP 1990. Tromsø, Norway. Ukraine. Russia. Tajikistan. Brazil. Armidale, New South Wales. Platteville, Colorado, 1969. Australia. Chicamarca, Peru. Millstone Hill, Massachusetts. Here are some of the listed capabilities of these facilities. Incoherent scatter radar, stealth scalar radar. VHF radar, operating within brain resonance frequencies. UHF radar, operating within head resonance frequencies. HF receivers, operating within body resonance frequencies. Fluxgate magnetometer. Induction magnetometer, possibly useful for detecting the low-intensity magnetic field brain manipulation methods in case another country tried to use them on the shadow government. Stimulated electron emission observations, this is similar to ESR imaging techniques. Gyro frequency heating research, this is another ESR MRI-like imaging technique, with a variation that might be used in the imaging over large areas using synchronized gyro frequencies for M absorption or reflection angles. Spread F observations. Heating-induced scintillation observations, another surveillance technology. VLF and ELF generation observations, brainwave frequencies. Radio observations of meteors and ballistic missile re-entry. Strange how we spend so much money on looking at meteors in the sky, but seemingly don't take interest in relieving the suffering here on Earth. Perhaps we should take the efforts to observe the universe with a grain of salt. It is just another way to couch technology development for military applications. Actual picture of the HARP mind reading and influencing an over-the-horizon radar facility being constructed in 1990, sent to me by a saint who worked on it. The largest phased array in the world stretches beyond what the eye can see. This is not the field that has tortured the most Americans. Brazil's or Puerto Rico's ionospheric heaters are the most likely candidates. But they are all integrated now into the global human surveillance grid that I was duped into helping integrate. So, this spread of terrestrial high-powered extremely large antenna is very suspect. While satellites could be involved in the integrated worldwide surveillance of human beings, it may be difficult for them to generate the power of the directed energy over the area that I measured during the severest attacks on me. My back-of-the-envelope calculations from the power output and Gaussian distribution over the area targeting my neighborhood gave me a figure above 500 kilowatts that greatly depended on how far the field extended. This is within the power ranges of most of the ionospheric heaters listed earlier. There are other coincidences. I deduced the methods of surveillance through many simple experiments during the year of the attack on me which happened to correspond to the capabilities of these so-called ionospheric heaters. More suspect behavior on the part of the military is that the two over-the-horizon radiopheric heaters are based about equal distance from the continental. The United States total internal reflection from the ionosphere is optimal for power transference from antenna to target arena. So the best guide to pinpointing when and where the first mind control radio network was established is to follow the trail of possible victims back in time and look at when the mass media streams began prepping the population for the human experiment trials. While I stated in the introduction that TAMI came online in 1976, that was only one system. There were earlier ones. John Nash, Nobel Prize winner, and made famous by the movie, A Beautiful Mind, worked for the NSA then apparently had sudden onset schizophrenia afterwards. This is a suspect case. It seems too intentional in its message. Really smart people who worked on top secret government projects can become crazy overnight. His illness began in 1960. That is the date that the Puerto Rico ionospheric heater came online according to several documents. HARP is often implicated in the mass torture experiments that the United States is conducting, but it didn't come online until 1990 and is probably only a backup system or meant to cover a different portion of the world. Remember that the mind control technology came from the Nazi scientists that were smuggled into the United States after World War II, in 1945. The TV series, The Outer Limits, began broadcasting a common theme in almost every episode in 1963. Every episode deals with evil aliens, psychic mind control, abductions, futuristic technologies and zombification or mental enslavement from aliens. The DoD and CIA are not an extremely creative group. The evil alien propaganda has worn thin by today and completely overused. Satanic cults, demonic possessions, poltergeists, and other wacky ridiculous stories are now in vogue to dupe the gullible masses and help those they torture and kill for data to cope with the betrayal of their government and people. However, mental illness is still their golden psychological mass mind program. Interestingly, those closest to the evil elements like enlisted men are the most likely to believe the technology and brutality, while doctors are the group quickest to jump to the programmed response and irresponsible diagnosis of mental illness. Nash may have been a threat because he wasn't working on cracking encryption codes as the movie contends. He was probably working on decision matrices and game theory for military applications or even for cognitive modeling and psychology of mass persuasion. His research interests were not in encryption like the movie would have you believe. He won the Nobel Prize for his work with game theory and optimizing decision models such as the famous Nash equilibrium used in economic theory. You can see how cognitive decision modeling would be more up his alley and aligned with the development of this system. He could have posed a major threat of leakage to civilian researchers or continued advancement on his own ideas. Another interesting coincidence is that Nash was forced into insulin shock therapy by his wife, which was used to treat psychosis in that day. Insulin shock therapy is another way to torture and split a personality, thereby erasing the memory of the person or at least making the memories inaccessible. Directed energy weapons can be used to induce diabetes, as I stated earlier, based on the World Health Organization literature. One victim got diabetes and then was manipulated into inducing insulin shock therapy through EEG cloning by messing with that person's ability to sense the symptoms of going dangerously low in blood sugar. Nothing has changed with their techniques other than it can all be done with EEG cloning remotely and with better plausible denial. So, the low-hanging fruit, if the people ever get fed up with tyranny, the illusion of freedom, and being killed and plucked off the planet to be an alien weapon test decimal point, they may want to organize in order to defend themselves and try to fry the electronics of all these research facilities simultaneously. Be creative, find a way to stop this. Poison space if disabling these antenna fields fails to stop the worldwide tortures. Build superconducting shielded rooms. I put the recipe in the appendix to make your own relatively cheaply. Build ESR and MRI field jammers. Stop the subterranean half-humans. I also put a list of joint command and control bases in the appendix that are suspected of housing many of the traitors. The rumor is that many of EEG cloning army is located in a Californian semi-secret base on the edge of Death Valley, near some mountains where there are 50 miles of underground tunnel and a very large signal intelligence and communications war room. The evil aliens are most likely kept in their cages there. I thought that I'd mention it in case people who are being tortured want to speak to their killers face to face. 2 twin girls who were tortured and made into CIA split personality spy slaves were used to assassinate people and prostitute themselves to the politicians in order to collect blackmail so that the United States politicians could be controlled by the executive branch of government. Also wrote a book called Secret Weapons. I highly recommend it for another true story and perspective on the depravity and shameful heritage Americans sweep under the rug. Another apology. Again, I must reiterate. I know that I blast whole groups of people with generalizations of occupations, affiliations, and organizations. I apologize profusely to those people who happen to fall into one of the categories that I scold but who do not fit the mold. Just remember, if the ruby slippers fit, wear them, Dorothy. Stupid human tricks. So to make the ignorant public, that's you, more aware of the voice of God technologies that exist and are being used to manipulate religious groups and the like, I will be pranking people with ultrasonic directed acoustic heterodyning and a parabolic microphone like the setup the Japanese candid camera show I mentioned earlier had. At a reasonable distance, I will be able to project my voice at an unsuspecting person, and if they respond out loud, I will be able to hear them. But, I will be nowhere in sight. If you suddenly begin hearing aliens, satanic cults, God, or dwarfs speaking to you and your friend next to you doesn't hear it, it might be me if it lasts only 30 seconds and I tell you that you have been pranked, or much worse, that it is the usual suspects in the United States government and you will be tortured for years. People who have experienced the 3 types of voice-to-skull technologies can distinguish between the sounds, but few are experts in them all. Hopefully the message will get out. It is incredible how much people rely on those little boxes called TVs for their reality. When I describe the details of how widespread EEG cloning experiments are, everyday people almost always respond, well, if that's true, why haven't I heard about it on the news? Just what if the news wasn't allowed to talk about certain topics and the information streams were controlled as tightly as we think communist counties' information to their population is controlled? The news wouldn't publish the thousands of people's claims who the government fed radiation to either when it was happening. Nothing changes except the delusion of democracy get better as the actuality furthers. Entrainment disruptors. The microwave hearing effect can be overpowered by another signal. It looks like individuals need to be tuned. Simple acoustic binaural beating jammers also work somewhat to weaken the focus of attention on the integration of the signal into voice. Breaking the hypnosis and electromagnetic trance of rhythmic bass brain waves can be done temporarily by focusing on non-rhythmic sound patterns like this logarithmic clicking sound file, repeatedly. Experiments with signal strength and disruption. Like with cell phones, which frequently encounter dead spots or lost connections, the direct brain link on the mind network also encounters noise or dropouts. But unlike with audio noise, neural noise is perceived much differently. And unlike a dropped cell phone connection, the communications re-establishing technologies like multipath and adaptive signal strengthening and background noise estimation very quickly re-establishes the link. I found what I jokingly refer to as psychic protection points. These are geographic spots that for some reason interfere or reduce the neural link strength. The San Francisco Bay Bridge has at least 2 spots while driving over that cause the neural link to drop out. Unfortunately, you can't walk across the bridge to stand in those zones. A dropout of an EEG heterodyned neural link simple feels like a relaxing or quieting of the mind, less neural chatter or babble from the participant minds. A noisy neural link doesn't cause a hissing or white noise like sound in the synthetic telepathy, but rather takes on different forms depending on the focus of attention. If the brain stops interpreting the tinnitus or Taos hum, due to misalignment of the energy pulses or unequal binaural perceived sound match as voice, just the hum or melodic tinnitus is perceived from very subtle or up to 120 decibels. But if one uses mylar and other metallized synthetic polyurethane deflection and absorption shielding around their body, they will perceive non-sequitorial thoughts and images ever so slightly, or even the microwave hearing effect words can become garbled, sounding like a computer-generated random sequence of phonemes. However, the disruptive shielding effects and degaussers are usually only temporary, and the neural link is re-established by the very impressive adaptive algorithms, much less prone to disruptions due in part to the low bandwidth requirements. Voice can go as high as 10,000 Hz, but brain bandwidth can be as small as 2,000 Hz. In addition to the low bandwidth requirement, the brain has a natural tolerance for fleeting errors. The information is encoded in the timings of the pulses and compressed in the complexity of the brain structure itself. Paragraph, sentence, and word of a book, each adding context to the information stream. The information is already almost all contained in the book, it just needs to be referenced in some order to create new thoughts from that previous work. You can see how a brain link has some encryption and compression built into its very nature. Only the person who holds the private key, that is the cognitive map of the target, can decipher the signal, and since the deciphering key changes at every moment in time depending on the current brain state, interception of the signal is almost worthless to normal signal intelligence interception methods. Unfortunately, many victims have been tricked into believing that if they shield their computers and monitors better, it will cut down on the near-field antenna effect. They have been trained by pain signals to believe this. All extra electromagnetic noise is good at reducing the signal-to-noise ratio for reading bioelectricity. Similarly, most have been trained not to sleep on spring mattresses. The coils probably interfere with their signal-to-noise ratio too. Blinding the Cyclops. By using fixed location phased array antenna fields, one can create directed energy that appears like it is coming from any direction. But in fact, the antennas are fixed. They can bounce their energy off of surfaces like the ionosphere. But the directions of the intersecting heterodyning beams are really stationary. That means the killing signals have an exact direction that can be calculated by ray tracing your location to the ionosphere back to the 4 or 5 directed energy antenna fields, aka over the horizon radar. Those are the directions you want to block to weaken the nervous system disruptor or the surveillance system's secondary effects for electrically sensitive individuals. Another idea is to blind the Cyclops. By blocking one of the intersecting beams, even if they have a very small angle between them, you can then detect the gravity wave or carrier signals, that is pinhole photography. Even if the carrier signal is hidden in deterministic broadband noise, you should be able to amplify it and direct it towards the ionospheric heaters. By amplifying the carrier wave and rebroadcasting it in the right direction, the signal-to-noise ratio would be nearly completely brought down to zero, and your bioelectric information can no longer be read with this technique. Detecting scalar, interferometric, gravity waves or scatter radar. Rather than go into details of the many methods used to disentangle the two or more nearly perfectly aligned cancelling carrier signals, I will just point the interested reader to the United States Patent Office for Scalar Wave Detectors. Number 6,753,690 Interferometric Signal Processing Apparatus. Number 6,420,872 Probe for detecting a transient magnetic resonance signal, wherein the ratio of the Q of the probe to the Q of the resonance signal is relatively large, filed by the Secretary of the Navy. Always look at patents filed by the DOD with a critical eye. Strategic deception is often the purpose. But this patent looks plausible. Here is a basic scalar wave detector design. Normally the waves destructively interfere and create a nearly zero electromagnetic field reading, but by putting in pinhole lens perfectly aligned, one can get a focused image of one of the sources in a phased array. The difficulty is the wavelength can change, and if satellites are used, they are probably moving targets. If ionospheric heater phased arrays are the main source, then the task becomes much more practical by the armature investigator. Portable bioelectric field scramblers. Don't cross the streams. Crossing the plasma streams is bad. Ghostbusters. Wrong advice. Mixing the plasma is good to rid yourself of the ghost in the machine. Disrupting the electron spin alignments using ion generators works to weaken ESR surveillance and EEG cloning attacks. Since ESR/EPR, electron spin resonance/electron spin polarity resonance, technique is one of the major methods of monitoring citizens' brain activity, one should be hypothetically able to build a portable device that scrambles the ionic heating of the body's surface charges. Something as simple as an irregular astable high-voltage oscillator with skin contact may do the trick. However, the high-voltage ionic charges may not migrate away from the point of skin contact, so something like a thin wire threaded conducting jacket may be necessary to provide a larger area of field disruption. The idea is to lower the signal-to-noise ratio containing the modulated bioelectric field information in the ionic electron gyroformation contained in the electron spin. This is why magnetic jewelry items are so popularly worn, to alleviate pain for millions of people who are sensitive to the global human surveillance system's biofield reading mechanisms. However, the magnetic jewelry has a static magnetic field except when one is moving. The adaptive filtering algorithms of the system will rather quickly learn to filter out any steady or regularly oscillating signals. As a side note, I want to dive into Russian theories of biocommunication in their psychic research from the late 60s. The entire field was a study of how neuron electrical fields could be picked up, amplified and received by someone else. The first breakthrough was using EEG probes to read the brain's electrical activity and modulate it with high voltage electrical fields around a person who was placed in a sensory deprivation tank for a week or longer. The person who was in the sensory deprivation chamber would begin to interpret the electrical modulation as his/her own sensory organs. So it was learned that the human brain is adaptable enough to interpret almost anyone else's electrical brain patterns as their own. This is the sixth sense phenomenon. Except in this example, the psychic or person in the sensory deprivation chamber is like Helen Keller and has no senses of their own, so this is pure EEG cloning, or in other words a substitution of their own senses and some higher level cognitive pathways mimicking the external brain signal. Monkey see, monkey do. We cannot escape our 96% DNA similarity to chimpanzees. It is an inherent property of self-organizing neural networks. This is why we conform, why fads spread, why culture exists, and traditions feel good. Psychic spies are like dummies or scarecrows. They are just receptacles for someone else's brain signals. Due to the sensory deprivation to make their brains entrain on the external signals, they become stupid or brain dead if and when they are disconnected from the signal. Our military was merely supposed to be a bunch of scarecrows to frighten off other countries from invading. What happened? Why are the scarecrows the aggressors? Why do they get positions of power in the government? Once it was known that human brains are mostly compatible and can learn anyone else's patterns, it became weaponized. Inducing one or more brain patterns into someone could also be done. This is just like piggybacking various brain signals. It matters not whether it is a voltage gradient on your skull or a synaptic voltage from a nearby neuron. It is like stealing that person's soul. Body Snatchers might have been another movie inspired by the large testing of the world's population of this weapon. Killing someone psychically is probably the most cowardly act in human history. Even the lion from The Wizard of Oz had more courage. See the section on psychic assassinations. And I'm sure the Tin Man had more heart than any of the scum in the United States CIA/DIA/military that continues the MKUltra tortures and artichoke programming of assassins to do their dirty work. Thousands if not more are tortured under this program, but you will never hear about it in the very controlled information streams. I'm so proud of what my ancestors fought and died for, to create a country based on lies and torture. If only we had a little more secrecy, we would all feel safer. See playing fascist gods, they are unimportant. Ionic heating frequency scramblers. There are two possible mechanisms of action in order to heat the ions so that their electron gyro frequency and angular momentum are synchronized, or that they create the high electron voltage necessary to induce neurotransmitter release. First, there is a microwave frequency that causes ionizing to occur. Secondly, electrical body resonance or head resonance would induce the desired gyro frequency alignment. The body electricity would be modulated into the stealth radar return intensity like a flickering candle or a twinkling star in the distance. So there must be a way to dersonate the body and head using their unique resonance frequencies. Perhaps messing up the ionizing frequency will also decrease the effectiveness of the surveillance technique. All these techniques will work under low-intensity directed energy, but could probably be overpowered if all the energy from these radar fields were focused on a very important target. If I only had a brain, the scarecrow effect. It should hypothetically be possible to record samplings of your own brain waves and modulate an external electric field with it so that the targeting and tracking mechanism would get confused and follow the EEG decoy, assuming you have no biotelemetric implants, GPS chips, or chemical markers. Since many methods are employed for surveillance of civilians, similar decoy methods would need to be implemented to throw off infrared thermal signatures, magnetic signatures. Body/head resonance mannequins might be needed, as well as traditional radar absorption and reflection signature alterations. Heart rhythm signatures can be fooled in a similar fashion to brain print signatures. I even worked on a technology that identified people by their unique gait. Stealth bomber radar absorbing insulators. Teflon has unusual insulating and charge collection properties that make it somewhat impermeable to ESR techniques or bioelectric modulation. A Teflon-like material is used on stealth fighter planes. Saran wrap is also a synthetic polymer with similar properties, and sure enough it does prevent some ionic heating and has similar ESR radar absorption properties since it doesn't conduct. Thermal signatures can be thrown off by electronically controlled Peltier junctions used to cool microprocessors. Scintillation techniques could be shielded by superconductor material. Remember that the radar fields are directional, but they can bounce signals off other material in order to reach the target. There are several more sensing technologies that you can read about on most physics websites, such as NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance, sister techniques like nuclear quadrupole resonance NQR. The object is to reduce the signal-to-noise ratio of all the tracking mechanisms in order to escape from the United States virtual hell and the global human surveillance grid. Full spectrum or broadband radar. Another reason the biocommunication and surveillance technologies are so difficult to lose is that every wavelength is observed. So even if one blocks or jams several of the frequencies, there is always more of the spectrum. Here is what a ping from a broad-spectrum radar pulse might look like. A radar ping with an exponential intensity decay at one frequency would help the imaging software more easily figure out at what depth the return is from and compensate for any nonlinearities in transmittance, absorption, or reflectance of a material. The recorded readings from many government-tortured test subjects' houses had a variation of this waveform. Its pings started at a high frequency, then progressed to a low-energy low frequency with a lower-energy continuous sawtooth waveform background. This actually makes more sense given the mathematics from radio communication theory of the energy spread when heterodyning or modulating a progressively lower frequency to create a lower sideband. Or in simpler terms, sweeping a high-frequency carrier range of one of two heterodyned beams would create this lower frequency combined waveform. It is a combination of every frequency up to some point. It could take the appearance of a broad background noise, or in order to segment the frequency ranges better it might skip logarithmically up the frequency domain. Even square waves or sawtooth radar signals create good broadband returns because every square waveform is made up of the infinite sequence of every odd harmonic, and the sawtooth is made up of every harmonic, which gives a nice sampling of frequencies across the spectrum. Low probability of detection, scatter radar. Ion heating. During a severe directed energy attack, CCD, charge-coupled devices, cameras become somewhat disabled due to the charge build-up. During Hodings the air becomes electrified, that is ionized. Knocking an electron out of orbit or just raising it to the outermost electron valence shell can be done with specific frequencies and thereby create ions, some negative and some positive. This is what the ionospheric heaters do. Once static electricity, ions or cold plasma, is created, the single electron orbits are used to amplify electron spin resonance signals and reading methods for the synchronized gyro frequency of the electron orbits as well as traditional ion reflectance spectra. See the appendix for an example of how NASA tricks astronomers and cosmologists into developing weapons by saying they are interested in observing meteors in the ionosphere. They are so bold with their hints of the real uses, that they call the ion flash of a meteor the size of a baseball upon impact the head echo effect when observed by the Puerto Rico ionospheric heater / over the horizon radar. That is exactly what it is used on human heads, not just meteors. They told the researchers that they can't look more than 20 degrees from zenith due to physical restrictions of the setup. The real reason is that the radar signal passes into space at those angles and frequencies, but they bounce back to Earth more than 20 degrees from zenith. The head echo effect location and tracking is exactly the same for human tracking. The flaws in the algorithms described in this paper are the same ones I discovered from my own experimentation. How can we play the same game as the government with the secret NSA domestic spying? We can organize a flood of the echelon system with false positives. Or use the method of autostereogram message passing to bypass them completely. A multi-billion-dollar system is completely worthless at detecting anyone who tries to defeat it. It monitors your average citizen quite well though, and helps bloat government with lots of federal government welfare jobs who get to pretend they are useful. Ideas to take out the weapons of torture and global tyranny. Spraying an orbiting cloud of ferromagnetic charged and magnetized particles at low Earth orbit, counter rotation for impacts and blackouts of the satellite systems capable of being used for psychotronics would probably work. Large ground-based solar ovens or lasers to lock on and heat the satellites above superconducting temperature might cheaply knock them out. Satellites over other countries' airspace that can emit psychotronic weapons signals or directed energy should be shot down since they are an immediate threat to their country's security. The Internet has proven to be the most important vehicle of truth. I commend Google and other search engine companies for continuing a high standard of integrity for the quest of truth. The right to free speech is being trampled on by algorithms flooding the Internet with disinformation to drown out the truth. I devised AI natural language parsing algorithms, to parse out truth from the method used to supplant it. By the way, type in miserable failure into Google to see a biography of George Bush. Plead to the public. I hope America appreciates what I am doing by going public with this information. Since I was tortured for a year by something far worse than what McCain experienced and thrown into one of these secret mind control prisons for just being too knowledgeable, I imagine I will surely get a secret death sentence for telling the truth in a publication. I am hoping that more public exposure makes me safer instead. But monthly, I get the reports of how many psychotronic victims have perished and it doesn't look good. Poisoning space. The United States has 413 satellites and the rest of the world has 382. Because the United States has taken the course of installing many space-based weapons, irresponsibly turning the pristine space into a battlefield of directed energy weapons, other countries should protect themselves by poisoning the airspace so the energy can't focus. Also create scalar wave detectors and bounce directed energy off the ionosphere back to the 15 or so ionospheric heaters to blind them. Here's an idea how. There are 8,000 tracked objects greater than the size of a golf ball. A ferromagnetic charged particle cloud at 480 kilometers, 300 miles, above the Earth's surface would greatly reduce remote sensing capabilities and targeting capabilities with directed energy weapons. There are no laws that any country abides by in space. So putting up anti-psychotronic shields which would disrupt other satellite services too would be a smart defense to counter America's expansionism phase, and to stop their soft kill weapons of assassination. Publicity stunts. We are left with no choice but to employ more drastic measures in order to raise awareness, get noticed, and have the problems addressed since the mass news streams refuse to pick up this story or broadcast the many peaceful protests, and no government agency has responded to the thousands of letters these organizations have written. We are planning the coordination of blocking major thoroughfares in all the metropolitan areas with trucks and protest signs. We have organized call centers, dialing over 700 people a day and are sending emails worldwide at a rate of 20,000 a day. We are renting high-powered argon lasers to project our message in the sky simultaneously in all major cities around the world. This is just a list of a few of the activities going on to awaken the sleepy minds that need to be vigilant as to what is occurring in order to expose and hopefully stop it. Saddening that something as horrific as domestic torture and federally sponsored terrorism against its own citizens can't be immediately addressed in a civil forum. We are also compiling a name and Facebook of all those suspected in aiding and abetting in these programs, from scientific researchers, to CIA trainees stalking gang members, to irrationally skeptical politicians that block laws to protect its citizens. The Facebook of the conspiracy will be distributed to other countries in hopes of ending the careers of those agents involved. The Promised Land. Land ho! Quickly, take a gander through the looking glass of time and see what rewards are in store for humanity's future once we have defeated the witches, spooks, zombies, and devils. We can return to the Garden of Eden, the perfect world of our very own design. We take our rightful place as gods of ourselves. Perhaps that's what we were all the time. Men at some time are masters of their fates. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings. Shakespeare, Julius Caesar, Act I, Scene 2. EEG heterodyne learning efficiencies. We are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. Be it the current Mgultra-like human torture and experimentation by the DOD or politicians not heeding the warnings of the collapse of other civilizations past. This inability to pass on all of human knowledge to the next generation continues to plague our progress. It is the death toll of the human race, for machines never forget. EEG cloning is the ultimate teaching tool. The learning process is greatly expedited both through shared understanding and mimicking the professor's brain waves. Not just through speech but conceptual communication takes place too. In the shared visual cortex space, 3D images and animations can instantly be shared and understood without the time-consuming process of making slides and visual simulations. In the Matrix, this feature of EEG heterodyning was symbolized by the heroes being able to upload knowledge of operating a helicopter almost instantly. But of course, the less noble route of this technology development is occurring. They are using this accelerated training to train brains into delusional thinking and psychotic symptoms. They have found that they can actually teach a brain directly how to misthink through brain entraining. This is useful to cause errors in judgment and perception in the enemy. Refer to the appendix for the Air Force description. This will also help with the cover-up, not only to discredit the individual victim's testimony but once perfectly shielded from the electromagnetic influence, it may take some time for those mind to adjust back to their natural normal thinking patterns. However, if the DOD would just release this technology to the world for all its potential, they too could get a lifetime of the best education in a mere fraction of what it took current scholars, and they would see the world not as a conquest for power but as a life form to nourish. Tomorrow is another opportunity to turn it all around. Vanilla Sky. A rare example of a smart alien trick. So one of the benefits we discovered of EEG cloning is the ability for multiple minds to convey complex concepts quickly to each. It is the ultimate teaching tool and could allow education to be absorbed in a tenth of its current time and effort. But there is a dark side to it. That is, if one doesn't know they are part of a hive mind collective, they can be led down a path of scientific errors. Common errors of logic are being mapped so that the scientific discovery process can be stifled or delayed in the civilian world. Below is considered a complex model of our universe which unifies gravity with electromagnetic field theory. Grand unified theories have been around since 1920 and Einstein died while trying to solve this puzzle. I don't know much about advanced physics, but it seems plausible to me. Here is what was conveyed to me via the mind meld and synthetic telepathy I imagine as an example of scientific espionage. Gravity travels at the speed of light. Gravity weakens by the square of the distance like a point of light. It appears that gravity behaves very much like electromagnetic energy. Why? Gravity attracts based on the energy density. Force of attraction equals gm1 m2/r2. Or substituting E equals mc2, where m1 n2 is just a standing wave of energy. ge1 e2/r2c4. This is not inconsistent with known observations. A black hole that only swallowed huge amounts of light, would still grow in mass and still bend light traveling nearby. It is energy density that bends space/time, not just mass. Field energy, or gravity waves as they are nicknamed, are created by intersecting nearly perfectly aligned beams of energy 180 degrees out of phase with the same intensity. So one could conclude that gravity is just a special case of electromagnetic field theory where a positive field is cancelling the negative field. The frequency of the fields would be irrelevant except for the amount of energy contained in it, and hence the frequency of a gravity wave is simply based on the mass or energy density which generates it and hence its intensity. So with a light photon or quantum, E equals lambda asterisk constant. Equivalently, lambda equals mass quantum/constant. So the immeasurable frequency of a graviton, quantum, is inferred from its mass of origin. If this were true, you can create a localized time distortion with a really intense directed gravity, scalar field. Relativistic effects would apply to the localized field. You can create a tractor beam and even bend light if you can create an energy density greater than that of matter. Or create matter out of energy. This is where science future writers get their ideas like replicators, transporters, tractor beams, and time travel machines. The intensity in order to do these things is obviously too great for current technologies and energy sources unless fusion has come of age. Another field of science that seems to have lost the interest of the public. Plus, the slightest error in the cancellation of the two energy sources would fry the target. The question is, what is wrong with this grand unified theory? The first question would be, if there is no particle exchange, this would be like free energy being emitted by the standing mass wave. However, you don't need particle exchange to explain where the energy comes from. Just like we found that mass and energy are the same. We will find out that space/time and energy have their equivalents. The expansion of the space/time continuum requires energy and cools off the temperature of the universe. The expansion of space around energy is slower, that is general relativity. Time progresses more slowly and space contracts. It is this drag on the expansion of space/time that creates the gravitational wake of free energy. It isn't free though. Energy is still conserved, it is just converted from the momentum of space/time. This would allow us to calculate the momentum of space/time dilation, that is the tensor of energy per unit area/time stretch of the manifold. The graviton as a particle has never been found. Unifying general relativity's geometric interpretation of the universe and the standard model of particle physics has always posed a hurdle for physicists. Now to consolidate quantum effects we need only apply the rules logically. Since it is known that mass is energy, and momentum of space/time is energy, and gravity is another field created from the drag on space/time momentum, then we should expect that gravity and space/time have quanta. This might be defined both by the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and Planck's constant. That's all they conveyed to me. It makes you wonder if John Nash, Nobel Prize winner, thought of his ideas before or after he was part of a hive mind and diagnosed with schizophrenia. This is a good example of the wireless global brain project and how the CIA plays Robin Hood with intellectual property. So we now may know why they call it the Centralized Intelligence Agency. It might be more appropriately called the Wireless Global Brain Project, created in 1947. They constrict knowledge and decide when and who will disseminate information or disinformation of their choosing through traditional media streams. We also know why CIA agents are called spooks. It is because their first scripts were all based on hauntings and possessions when testing the EEG heterodyning technology. Another stupid alien trick. Boo. It's Colonel Casper the Ghost, the main hive participant says as he taps himself on the shoulder, which I feel and turn around. Laughter ensues. Dreams and harvesting the wet nets. 2 years prior to my 1-year torture and menticization, I stopped dreaming or stopped remembering my dreams. It didn't disturb me. It was merely a curious note. I heard an analysis that only 15 years ago that all the world's computers combined didn't equal the computing power of one human brain. I do not know how the author derived it. But I surmise that it was based on the fact that the brain has 1 trillion synaptic connections, and assuming a human used their full capacity that each synapse would equal 1 transistor. Well, imagine if that were true, we could harness the down cycles of every human brain while people are sleeping. Like with the distributed grid computing frameworks such as SETI or Globus, the unused human computing power could be harnessed for unbelievably powerful distributed computations. Dividing a problem up for distributed computing might have the subjective experience of dreaming to an individual. Parts of the brain being used to calculate partial problems where the results would seem nonsensical and non-sequitorial in a conscious state. Becoming Borg. Let's look at the collective conscious of the human race. Communication amongst people can be thought of as signal transmission analogous to synaptic transmissions in the brain. Throughout the last century we have been speeding up the communication and growing connections through the telecommunication infrastructure from email to mobile phones. The Earth is becoming more aware and conscious. When you speed up information flow from one person to the other, the ideas become more integrated to the individual and the sense of self becomes blurred. Now continue this trend line into the future with brain-to-brain interfacing technologies. The communications are even faster and more efficient. The distinction of information flow and storage becomes more amorphous. The physical housing of the brain is still well defined and segmented, but the soul, the information that you experience, becomes less and less tangible and distinguishable as to where the boundaries are. We will become the Borg. Now the question is, will it be designed with a centralized intelligence or be like the Internet, a free-forming and evolving self-organizing distributed intelligence? Elements in the government obvious prefer the former, which is clearly suboptimal according to evolution and optimization theory. Mankind is obsolete. The futurists all predicted that we would have our own robot slaves by now doing our work for us while we relaxed and could do anything we wished due to the prosperity. In a twist of fate, we humans turned out to be the robots with the machines enslaving us. As long as we don't become too aware of the inconsistencies of the system and keep our minds on our little job, work hard for the machines in exchange for points, hopefully we can live our entire lives without being pulled out of the delusion. We are the land of the free and brave, with people afraid of their own government. From another perspective, how long will humans be cheaper than machines to do any task? Ask yourself truthfully, do you see a computer or machine doing your job as well as you 10 years from now? I have analyzed the largest companies in the world in a management consultant role, the most sophisticated computer systems, and worked in almost every corporate function at some point. I assure you that automation of your tasks is not far away. Right now the United States economy has been shifting to a service-oriented economy. Will the human race be downsized? Noah's Ark. A disturbing theory that has been postulated and repeated many times by those involved in watching the government is that there appears to be a plan for a major population decrease. DNA samples are being catalogued for every species on the planet and unique brains are being catalogued into the CIA/.TAMI network. The cataloging may not just be to improve the cloning capabilities for spying and warfare. It may be a justification that not that much will be lost for global population genocide. The Earth cannot support the projected population growth. Resources will run out. So a plausibly denied event might be planned. A terrorist releases an airborne virus. Rogue countries decide on nuclear war. It is difficult to guess exactly how it would be architected to look like another group was responsible for it. It is something to keep in mind for the next 50 years while world events unfold. Since silicon immortality isn't that far away, a decrease in population might be justified for that reason. Most life will do anything to survive. If it were known that immortality is being rolled out to a few very rich people, desperate people may do anything to get it. Or if it could be given to everyone simultaneously, the planet would always remain crowded, yet might be another concern. The ego trip. In Arnold Schwarzenegger's movie Total Recall, there is a false memory implantation technology that uses magnetic coils around the head. This is one way that brain waves can be modified, as being researched by several academic institutions and labs. In this application, he wants to take a vacation to Mars. He elects an option of the virtual experience called the ego trip. Why be yourself on this trip? EEG heterodyning causes an alteration in personality, some weighted combination of all the people in the hive mind. I was shown that personality overlays can be captured from one person and replayed onto someone else. The ego trip really exists. It is a capture of temperament and emotional state mix and can be inserted by the computer interface onto the whole hive mind or just individuals. This aspect of EEG heterodyning has unusual applications for empathizing with other people. Don't judge someone until you walk a mile with their brain waves. How about the application of self-improvement? Don't want to be shy with the ladies anymore, just put on a personality overlay. Wives can finally make their husbands understand them better. Enemies can resolve their misunderstandings and differences. The list is endless just for this particular aspect of full brain communication. For the spy community, it can help them more easily infiltrate organizations with a particular belief system and mindset so that they are less likely to be discovered by subtle voice intonations and body language cues. Judgment Day. The current evil uses of EEG heterodyning can all be turned around. Rather than ruining the concept of justice by manipulating witnesses, judges, and juries, or by committing crimes that can't be traced back to the person's will who cloned his/her brainwaves onto someone else, the technology allows the judge to understand the sincerity of the accused. Truth can be more easily interpreted. Prisoners could be released under psychic surveillance parole. Sentenced people could opt for mental reprogramming rather than incarceration. Rather than being the #1 nation in the world for incarcerating our people, we could be the freest nation through use of the technology. All these benefits are predicated on being able to awaken the world to its existence, thereby taking it out of military top-secret status so that civilian commercialism and development can commence. Philosophy of consciousness. The keepers of EEG heterodyning technology fear that there will be a breakdown of social order, a vast moral cataclysm, and dissolution of religion around the world if it were known that the brain has been deciphered. People are resistant to the idea that our soul, our entire essence, is contained in the electrochemical signals of the brain. However, I disagree. I believe that religions will adapt as will morality to the better understanding of ourselves. There are two important ethical and legal questions that arise from this. How can we be held responsible for our actions if we are purely a product of genetics and stimuli from the environment? If the government is messing around with the electrical signals of the population's brains, how can anyone be charged for any crime given the unknowns of their experimentation? How can we even trust ourselves and our own thoughts if we know that they can be manipulated electromagnetically? Notes. Philosophical thought experiments in psychophysics. Transporter problem. Operating table. Wireless connections. Freedom and choice defines living. More
More EEG cloning crimes. More new kinds of crime on their way. Rich, arrogant, desperate old men that want to live forever can clone their brain in silicon to be transferred or EEG cloned onto another body without the stored facsimile being at mortal risk within their purchased host. We found organ harvesting a repulsive crime, body snatching and soul stealing is far worse but less bloody. Robin Hood of intellectual property. There is some evidence that the psychic operatives play a role similar to that of the tale of Robin Hood. They EEG clone spy on scientists, inventors, dreamers, and writers' minds, steal their intellectual property and ideas, and transmit them to others so that the recipients think they came up with the ideas. I believe that this is how Hollywood and mass media is used inadvertently to make movies that help to discredit test subjects' testimonies. Intellectual property lawyers are going to have difficulty sorting out hive mind intellectual ownership. What if the whole human race was neurally linked into a complex cyber hive mind network? Maybe it already is. Maybe there is no difference between a neurally linked hive mind and other information streams except for speed of communication. The philosophers of our time will enjoy debating this topic. Audaces fortuna iovat, fortune favors the bold. Virgil. At Harvard College as an undergrad in Gray West in Harvard Yard, I held many philosophical debates with a guy named Ramsey. He believed in mind-body duality and was a philosophy major. He believed that you could imprison the body but never the mind. I argued against him for weeks. And as irony would have it, a spirit and mind as free as mine where the only strong opinion I vocalized was intolerance itself, is now in an electromagnetic government-sanctioned mind control prison. Apparently there are limits to freedom of thought and expression. I ventured too far. Hear the sounds of psychotronic technology as perceived by targets at the website www.thematrixdeciphered.com. For anyone who wants to be the next Bill Gates out there and would like some coaching into how to pursue synaptic amplification cognitive modeling for applications like reliving a memory with all the emotions, visions, and smells attached to it for the next generation video camera-like device, I will guide you, but I can't help you directly because I've been tortured more than any common man could bear and have psychological blocks how close to the technology I can get without getting ill. They modeled their behavior control methods after a movie called Clockwork Orange. Logical extrapolation of subjective/objective consciousness duality. The universe is teeming with choice at the quantum level. It is only logical for one to conclude it gives rise to the same subjective experiences when mapped. Functions coming in and out of existence in the burble of virtual particle interactions. Since a quantum state is indeterminate, it truly operates at the level of a nonlinear nodal point of causal events. Like in the mind, choice is perceived at the moment of whether a neural group fires or not near its firing threshold. The structure of the universe is such that the smallest particles of interaction act like events at a firing threshold. Will the atom absorb the M energy or let it pass by? Truly unknowable given the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. This would be perceived by the function and system of which it is part as pure choice and free will. Not only is freedom necessary for the perceived experience of living, but I submit that this is evidence for much higher order conscious entities. Mankind first came to the egocentric faulty conclusion that the earth was flat, then the sun revolved around us, that we are the only life in the universe, and that consciousness exists only at our level of complexity. This is only a thought experiment though, because communicating with any other form of intelligent systems would be almost impossible. Organizational architectures for optimal decision. Voting as an example. Why do we get corrupt and average IQ political leaders when there are so many outstanding people to choose to lead us? It is a flaw with the system. First of all, any intelligent individual, unless they have an ego and a need to be written in a history book, would not undergo the media scrutiny that politicians go through. They don't get paid much, including the president, unless you count all the perks such as stock portfolio manipulation. Secondly, the uneducated people get the same weight of influence in this decision process. Since we are dealing with important decision matrices, it only makes sense to weight the decision tree by some factor that represents the value of influence each vote should count. Take a political history and awareness test to indicate your level of involvement to put this country on track. Scale it 1 to 10 points and that is how much your vote will count. Running simulations of intelligent organizational structures shows this is a far superior way to optimize to a correct and intelligent decision. Reverse engineering Tammy. Sorry, this section is not finished and probably of most interest to people. Come back later. Tammy is one of the most sophisticated global neural interfacing systems this country has. It is no wonder that those children in the Pentagon that like to play war want to keep this toy so badly. If it were known how it is being misused, the public would be outraged. My goal here is to inspire private research into psychophysics, or as the military likes to market it, cognitive modeling, neural programming, computer/brain interfacing, and wireless brain modulating technologies. If a company or entrepreneurs would like to usher in a multi-billion-dollar or even trillion-dollar market, they would be well advised to pursue this research. There, of course, is some risk. You might be menticized. But if enough independent groups pursue the rediscovery and development of these technologies, they can't get us all. Basic hardware architecture. Brainwave readings. Start with the Malik patent. Reproduce his results. Experiment with more sophisticated waveforms like the ones used for full-spectrum radar. They look like this. This scanning technique across the frequency power spectrum will give a complete picture. Signal filtering and analysis is necessary to isolate the most important information-carrying frequencies. Find and study the brain/head, body resonances to see where the body electricity can best be seen in the return signal. Model neurons as miniature microwave transceivers and the head as an electromagnetic cavity resonator. Here is the specific equipment used by the Air Force in their development of neurological disruptors looking at neurotransmitter stimulated release by microwaves. From the hardware, a clean signal representing brainwave amplitude, phase/frequency will result. Software architecture. An initial cognitive model will be required. This is the most difficult part of data collection. Using a large number of aligned samples for spoken words, movements, emotions, etc., and an autocorrelation algorithm will filter out the non-correlated brainwave components for each brain function category sample set. From these classes, a recognition engine, neural network-based or Markov model-based, could be used to recognize when those brainwaves are present. Both a time-based template and Fourier spectrum analysis will be necessary to identify the particular active brainwaves and their time sequence pattern progression for that task to be recognized or later stimulated. Remember to analyze frequency/phase shift information as well as amplitude when classifying the signals. Remember that multiple scales are needed to make the pattern recognition engine time scale invariant. Translation between people's brainwaves is then a simpler task. Once the database contains an initial human cognitive model, every subsequent modeling effort will just be small deviations from that. Using a program that compares and aligns signals between two people will expedite the mapping process with some human intervention. Diagrams. Now your system has a brainwave mapping for most human cognitive functions, and your system can translate your brainwaves to someone else and vice versa, or your own brainwaves can be played back to you like an MP3 file. Diagrams. Start off by reproducing what the Stanford Research Institute did back in the 80s, and work on just phoneme and word recognition, both spoken and heard, in order to gain confidence in the modeling process. Diagrams here. Details of software design and EEG synchronization tactics. Repetition of a brain entrainment signal to both parties helps synchronize the minds for a mind meld. Use binaural beating at 3.2 Hz. You should have a graph of each participant's EEG energy spectrum and their combined overlap to view for feedback. A full sentence is usually used repeated 3 times until EEG overlap is above a particular threshold. Only one mind can dominate the shared brainwaves at a time, so only on speaker will ever be heard. Volunteers. There is definitely a group of people more susceptible to electromagnetic brainwave induction. These people can be found in mind control forums and support groups for torture by the government. There are thousands of people that will be willing to volunteer and help out who are proven to be susceptible. Also, in the CIA's version of the system, they utilize hypnotic binaural beating brain entrainment to synchronize the brain functions. It seems that this makes the whole process of aligning and isolating brain waves easier. Remember that truth resonates. Good luck to all you brave entrepreneurs. Hope you make $1 billion while ushering in the new dawn of mankind. If I ever escape from the mind-controlled slavery and free the thousands of others, I'll join you in your endeavor. How magnetic resonance imaging works. How electron spin resonance imaging works. Immortality. It has arrived. The question is, can you afford it? There are 2 types to choose from, and that is genetic repair and organ transplants, or silicon form. Here is the back of the envelope calculation for the current cost of silicon immortality. You have roughly 1 trillion synaptic connections. The state-of-the-art silicon manufacturing techniques are 23 times better than Intel's 42 million transistors CPU. So a synapse at 16-bit resolution needs 16x1012 transistors. If a chip costs $350 for 42 million transistors, then your mind would cost $350 1 trillion 16-bit/42 million equals $133 million. Not many can afford that, so immortality will need to be rolled out like most products with the rich early adopters of any technology. I built my first cascadable digital neural network chip during senior year as an undergraduate at Harvard, which only fit 7 neurons on it. The bit resolution would determine the resolution of thought. The government labs have found a way to condense the brain's information into covariance matrices. Perhaps this was the inspiration to the title of the movie, The Matrix. We only use 10% of our brains, whatever that means. And with information compression techniques, the cost of silicon immortality will come way down in the decades to come with better fabrication techniques that follow Moore's law. People don't like to think of themselves as pure information with a physical interface of the body. This mind/body duality has been of great debate amongst philosophers. Many people create meaning for themselves through the concept of continuance genetically. Evolutionary success is determined by the number of successful offspring. Financial success is determined by the size of the bank account. Others determine success by the quantitative happiness that they were able to maintain throughout their lifespan. My personal belief in continuance, if I never can afford immortality, is in the propagation of my information. I am my mind. Simply by you, the reader, reading my ideas, a meme has spread that replicates my brain signals into you. I believe it to be an even more direct replication and continuance of me. I am inseminating you the reading with ideas forged from my mind. My continuance is information which becomes distributed amongst those minds I have mated with. To bring a little humor to this odd concept, you've been mind copulated with while reading this book. Enough philosophizing. Let's look at the practical matter of immortality. You can save your state on a hard drive so that in case you have an accident, you can be reborn from the last save. This overlaps with an old concept of that of religion where Christ saves your soul. Maybe he could be viewed as a database administrator saving your information structure and evolution of the program to be run at a later time. Yes, I know it is difficult to accept that we are complex, dynamic, semi-closed, finite state machines. But that is the psychophysics of it. So let's revisit the Malik patent again. A wireless link can be made between two or more brains using these techniques of observing the brain state changes of ion gates opening and closing. That means during transmission of the electromagnetic waves your soul is being amplified and completely bodiless until it reaches the other brain it is to mixed with. I am trying to converge people's models of reality with this statement. Your soul is composed of signals requiring a physical structure to contain it. It doesn't matter what that physical structure is. It could be billiard balls on a giant pool table. It could be atoms colliding in a gas lattice. If the information is there, then the subjective consciousness experience is there. This is what is meant by computational equivalence by Wolfram. Consciousness is the most abundant property of the universe. We exist because the universe is dreaming. Empower your freedom and self-determinism. Read this aloud to yourself. The machine doesn't know why it functions. I am the reason it moves. I am the spark of inspiration, the fire that fuels it. I am the meaning and the motive. It exists for me. I am the answer to the question why. I am here, now. I am the reason it exists. I am my own God. I determine my destiny. I am not a tool, nor a tool user, but rather I am the maker. Stop the machine. Create your world. Take back your country. Tuning the mind. There is one potential benefit to thought-amplifying technology without the evil medicization application. That is like an athlete who takes steroids in order to increase their biochemical testosterone signal, which in turn creates muscle. A less than optimally tuned mind could benefit from amplification of their electrical brain resonance and entrainments. One is naturally more creative under an amplification signal. If you look at the normal distribution of all human qualities, they each have their benefit under specific conditions. If you are short, it comes in handy when seated in an airplane. If you are tall, you can reach the top shelf of a cupboard. Similarly, if you are depressed neurochemically, then you are less likely to be prone to spontaneous decisions and more focused. Or if you are manic, you tend to be over-enthusiastic about every idea which can motivate others. There is an optimal mindset for every occasion. Intelligence, grossly measured by an overall metric called IQ, is the weighted summation of various human intellectual capabilities that society has deemed valuable. So intelligence can be optimized for a particular individual using this technology. So far, the EEG cyber hive mind collectives have only achieved suboptimal configurations less than the parts. But that may change with continued research. The synapse has been described as Medusa's head. The woman creature with snakes coming out of her head with just one glance can turn a man to stone. The neuron depolarization speed is 200 miles per hour or 116 m/s. At that speed you can calculate the number of neurons that can fire in a second from a chain of connected neurons. These are the opportunities of influencing choice when a neuron is near firing thresholds. An average axon ranges from 5 to 50 millimeters. That means in a firing pathway you would pass through 2,000 to 23,000 neurons in 1 second for a single chain reaction. This calculation is a bit higher than the measured brainwave frequencies because it doesn't take into account the time delay for chemical messengers between neurons and other factors. You can see that if you could read the phase, amplitude, and frequency changes in the brain resonances, you would have a complete picture of what was happening at the neuronal level. This is in line with Russian literature that describes psychotronics as high-frequency pulsed ELFs. That means that the resonance frequencies of the brain as described in the Malik and Stocklin patents could use precisely timed pulses at these neural synaptic junctures to add energy to the synaptic firing decisions. These pulses would have components less than 23 kHz and could possibly be picked up by the microwave hearing effect, accounting for the melodic tinnitus many surviving weapon testing victims report. So, I told you at the beginning of my report that my torture and menticization occurred while I was looking into non-lethal directed energy weapons and injecting electromagnetics into the brain for virtual reality applications. I doubt it was coincidence. I have been given a death sentence for pursuing this research, but I don't want to dissuade other scientists from inventing all the positive applications I discussed in this report. I would recommend using the Yale University School of Medicine's human body model that includes 67 tissues and their electromagnetic properties. Using FDTD simulations, you should be able to calculate the complex waveforms necessary to influence particular brain regions in a specific person through resonances and by SAR, specific absorption rate, factors. Look up the Sony patents on mind influence using ultrasonic phased arrays for guidance. But the alternate approach would be to recreate the Malik and Stocklin patents first. It may turn out that is it far easier to influence brain function than that. It may be that timing brain resonance frequencies, modeling the head as a microwave cavity, to neuron firing events is enough to perform brainwave alterations. Other scientists, with military backgrounds, claim that using small magnetic fields at low frequencies will do it. I know I have not achieved the greatness of my heroes Stephen Hawking, Carl Sagan, or Green by simplifying mind reading and influencing technologies for everyone to grasp. But I do believe I have reached enough people. And you can consider yourself enlightened, and not just illuminated anymore. I hope that this book will help all the electric heads out there subject to the brain-damaged, selfish, power junkies experiments in torture and death. And awaken and inspire the good people of this country to take back democracy and restore justice by finding all the treasonous elements in the conspiracy that have stolen it from us. Potential beneficial uses of neuron influencing technology. Other research that is occurring in this area of brain amplification technologies, is tuning a brain for optimal problem solving for different situations. One neuroscience publication describes how adding noise to a neural network can increase its convergence speed. So for example, your mind when you are problem solving is trying every possible combination of solutions it can think of to coverage on the best probable answer. This searching algorithm can be speeded up with brain amplification. It is also useful during brainstorming sessions or creative problem solving. A brain-amplified state jostles the usual mental pathways out of their ruts of entrainment and can help with finding new solutions. It is extremely likely that a mind is often not at its maximum potential state for particular situations. Coffee helps achieve a better state of mind for some going to work, for example. Others find meditation a way to achieve a desired state of mind. Being able to electromagnetically dial in a desirable mental state anytime one wishes would be a huge boon for the human race and progress. This could have been available since 1960 if we didn't have such selfish, power-hungry, small-minded men and women controlling this technology. While increasing the brain's amplification can increase the intelligence of a person up to a point. Tuning a brain past the point of optimal amplification turns the amplifier into a disabling, informational, weapon. The symptoms induced are psychotic, and schizophrenic-like. The person becomes unable to focus on one task and often becomes paranoid. The brain's pattern recognizers begin to misfire and patterns are perceived where there are none of significance. It is this sliding threshold of sensitivity that can be useful to increase hearing perception or visual motion perception. One can see why the DOD is studying this for soldiers. The dawn devours the darkness. Here are some good potential uses of classified mind control non-lethal directed energy weapons if the public accepted it despite all the abuses already committed by researchers, governments, and agencies. Sorry, this section is not finished and probably of most interest to people. Come back later. Epilepsy. Since the epileptic seizure signal has been developed as a weapon, a brain about to go into seizure could be detected and the oscillation prevented. Anesthetizing via neuronal amplification. I know much of this material is hard for people to grasp. So I try to reiterate the concepts more than once. I have tried my best to simplify the material for general consumption, but some details are necessary in order to capture the ghost in the machine. There have been several audio frequencies that have caused an anesthetizing effect on humans. Pain perception is decreased. Almost all the experiments that I and others have conducted point to the property of the weapon system as being only able to amplify or add energy into the system. This is consistent with the Air Force non-lethal weapons research at the University of Nevada, where stimulated neurotransmitter release is the mechanism of synaptic modulation. However, in one of the tests in the Mkutara sequence, they do anesthetize sensations and sensitivities. This is not due to reducing neuronal amplification but rather amplifying inhibitory synaptic connection pathways. About 10% of synapses have a negative voltage addition to the summation at the Hillock amplification determination for firing. So amplifying those synaptic connection pathway frequencies would create a dampening effect on other pathways, but not due to taking energy out of the system. Sensitize areas with neuropathy. For example, the feet in diabetics become numb after many years, and this leads to infection detection problems. Brain amplification technologies are used to increase the perception of pain, so it could also be used to increase the sensitivity to areas of the body that have lost it. Cure multiple sclerosis by forcing electrical depolarization, compensating for demyelinization of the axons of nerves. Depression relief, dopamine and other neurotransmitter can be increased through brain amplification. The side effects of antidepressant medications would be eliminated. Appetite suppression. They are looking into placating hungry populations so that they peacefully starve to death. But what a multi-billion-dollar market they are missing out on. Students who have trouble focusing on a subject like science because it disinterests them could turn up their interest levels when they needed to. Insights into mental disorders, faith healing. Through hive minds, psychologists could get a perfect understanding of psychological illnesses or delusions and correct them through thought training. Non-invasive electrical brain stimulation. Tremors are often cured by invasive electrical probes like what Michael J. Fox had done. It could be cured by non-invasive neuron modulation technologies. Negotiations and communications, United Nations and meetings where total disclosure and trust is needed, to avert war for example, can be used to probe minds and build trust. An experience recorder, relieve emotions and sensory experiences of others and self. That is Strange Days, the movie. Seriously, this exists now but just for military covered uses. The Babelfish Universal Translator. When you have the meaning of words mapped along with the internal vocalization, it is a far easier problem in computer science to translate in real time to another language. Music and movie creation. I was demonstrated a very cool example of what future commercial technology will bring. The system can capture the imagined sounds and visions in this extrasensory mode. If two or more people are connection, they both create the one share visual workspace or sound space. There is both huge potential for interactive movies and efficiency at creation. Similarly, a band could produce an album in a day. These brain signals are decoded and captured on computers. The cognitive models enable translation into traditional media forms. In addition, action games are played. The problem to overcome for this industry is that there are no rules to constrain the imagination of either of the players, so anything can happen even if it doesn't follow physical dynamical laws. Electronic inebriation, dependency intervention. Get drunk and be able to shut it off for driving. Electronic drugs. Psychoactive drugs are pleasurable and often addictive. They are altering neurotransmitter release or reuptake. In effect, they are simply changing brain signals. The mind control experiments done on me and thousands of others can reproduce electromagnetically many effects known from abused drugs. If I were a major Colombian leader of a multibillion-dollar drug cartel, I would be investing in research to produce legal electromagnetic signals that provide similar effects as their commodity. The only difference is that brain signals need to be specialized to the individual unless you have the kind of database the CIA/DOD keeps up for mapping between variances. Perhaps not in the too distant future, we will see teenagers, rather than getting stoned, using magnetic coils, microwave emitters, and EEG probes, listening to Pink Floyd and downloading new electromagnetic brain patterns from the internet. Clearly, since schizotronic, psychotronic, generators can amplify brain signals and induce the same symptoms as naturally occurring schizophrenia, electronic magnetic inductions could also cure the illness. Researchers at Yale University are looking into this using a $2 million grant from the Department of Health, although their research is flawed and based on faulty assumptions about their subjects' root causes of the symptoms. Seizures can be induced with these weapons, so the reverse is true. Sugar metabolism can be manipulated using microwaves, so diabetes can be induced or potentially cured in a similar fashion. Emotions are precisely manipulated in the mind control demonstrations. Since depression can be induced, that means all the people taking Prozac and other depression medications could be cured through this electromagnetic brain mapping tool. Maybe the whole population is already being subjected to an apathy signal during this continued takeover. That is what was speculated about the Russian psychotronic signals from the 7 most powerful transmitters in the world directed at the United States back in 1976. It was a hypnotic subduing apathy like brain entrainment. If you can make people feel happy about a fascist government, who will put up a fight or resist? The list is endless what self-deterministic neural programming technology can do for humanity once it is taken away from the small minds that current hoard it. If you want to quit biting your nails, it is only a signal away. This was demonstrated for me. I have bit my nails all my life, and suddenly for a period of 2 months in the middle of my year-long demonstration, I quit biting my nails. This actually disturbed me more than anything because I didn't feel like myself without this bad habit. If you want to quit smoking, eat less and lose weight, exercise more, watch less television, be more patient with your kids, it can all be done with neural programming. Think about how fewer pharmaceutical drugs will be necessary to become what we strive to be. Unless we can expose the technology details now and get the funding for demonstrating the prototypes, society will have to wait at least another 25 years before the Air Force and other agencies divulge these secrets, according to scientists in top-secret labs. Cyber hive mind, meeting of the mind's possibility for constructive IQ/EQ tasks. See the Global Brain Project. Mobile communication without cumbersome electronics. Full emotional content conveyed with speech. New forms of intelligences. I couldn't dig up all the details of the early work on mind, magnetically integrated neuron duplicator, but here is the basic gist of it. It is a known adaptability of the brain to compensate for a loss of a sense like vision or hearing. The neurons that were used for those functions get harnessed by the other senses, and those senses become sharper. This is equivalent to increasing the resolution and processing power of that sense. Now the reverse phenomenon also is true, but rarely studied or cited. That is, the brain will incorporate a new sense and use it. This is what the psychics call the sixth sense. It is this electromagnetic constant signal modulated into their neural influences that a brain learns to interpret. The field and weapon is called biocommunications. This signal is basically composed of virtual neurons or sensing capabilities. The Army is studying using the tongue as an input device into soldiers' brains by retraining the way a person interprets the taste and tactile information. The new information can be sonar or visual, for example, and the brain will readjust to create mental models of the surroundings with tongue information, like a snake or how a bat uses sound. But this has even more profound consequences. Virtual neurons act just like regular ones, except they are stored or computed from a computer anywhere in the world. So part of these psychics' brains are located somewhere else. In addition, this could have serious consequences if the entire population has been put on this network and their brains have learned to listen to the signal, often heard as tinnitus when out of tune. The plasticity of the brain is due to the self-organizing nature of neural networks. Add a few more inputs, the brain will learn to use them, but at a cost of computing power to the other senses and mental tasks. Take some inputs away, like in a sensory deprivation chamber, and the brain will quit relying on them and focus the neurons on whatever other input they have. So some of the top secret research that has been going on for many decades now involves trying to create a higher order intelligence composed of virtual neurons and multiple brains and new sensors using this wireless neural linking system. See Mind Viruses for further understanding of threats this research has caused. We are way past just the sixth sense. These kind of neurally connected work groups could prove to have enormous efficiency and potential to be used to create a smarter being of sorts. It might be useful to compensate for neuron loss due to aging or Parkinson's syndrome. Immortality, way to duplicate biological form into pure information. Our species can ascend to a purely informational state and leave the corpuscle behind. Brain-machine interfacing technology. Not only are they conducting internal voice recognition using the neural feature set of premotor muscle movements and word meaning recall brain waves, they are less successfully working on computer vision image recognition techniques from the decoded visual cortex. Once the visual cortex is decoded back into a 2D or 3D representation, traditional computer vision techniques are applied to recognize words or objects. This has incredible potential for mind/machine interfacing. By just visualizing characters being typed, a computer could recognize the characters, send them to a virtual keyboard to an internet browser, and then project the resultant information page in their mind's eye. This would be getting close to a true cyber hive mind interface and access to instant information on demand. In business school, I borrowed a pair of heads-up display glasses from DARPA for a wearable computer entrepreneurship project. The idea was to overlay a computer screen in each eye that would enhance reality with information that only you could see. For example, with a small camera embedded in the glasses, face recognition could be done. A bio of the recognized face comes up. Or if you are giving a presentation, you could read off a teleprompter only you could see. We focused on airplane maintenance, where workers could read manuals but use their hands simultaneously. Doctors could get a magnified view of their patients or a real-time MRI scan overlaid on their normal sight and sounds, etc. At the time, I did not think that direct wireless neural interfacing techniques were so developed. While the scientific community is very aware of the advances in wired or probe brain interfacing from monkeys that control robot arms with their thoughts to humans that can control mouse cursors with magnetic brain probing, no one is allowed to know or acknowledge the wireless methods I exposed in this book. Better truth detection methods. Instant control of moods and energy levels, electronic coffee served in bed in the morning maintaining perfect energy levels, sleep aids, i.e. 1/2 Hz signal at bedtime. Kidnappings, can locate anywhere in world by EEG or body resonances signatures. Better medical diagnoses. Expert can feel the symptoms of the patient and immediately and more accurately diagnose patients. For example, someone suffering a heart attack could be diagnosed immediately and even potentially the particular clogged arteries versus those that come in with panic attacks. Neuromarketing, direct implanting of advertising and subliminal suggestions. Create good habits in yourself. Personality overlays. The demonstration. I was replayed PMS as a torture. Guys, it is the worst set of emotions and physical cramping you can possibly imagine. The military is using a captured signal from someone who suffered terrible PMS for torture just to give you an idea what some women go through monthly. Have sympathy. Any set of brainwaves can be captured and held or replayed continuously. Variable weightings of brain entrainment participants are achieved. They can become mostly you, or vice versa, they can take control of your mind and body. It's an unnerving experience, no pun intended, to become a silent observer while you transform into someone else. You feel their will, emotions, and physical movements. Add more participants in the cyber hive mind, and you get multiple mental focuses of attention and it quickly becomes dysfunctional. Many subjects of these mind control experiments have been duped into believing they are possessed, have multiple personalities, or that some religious figure is speaking through them. Teaching is the biggest use. Having children model teacher's mind. As well as teacher being able to convey concepts and create 3D animations in his mind for all to view and understand instantly. Control fear like for public speaking or skydiving. Identify sociopaths and criminal intent through brain prints. Flush out the traitors in the government who commit criminal acts of torture and practice assassinations. Protect and recognize minds from a Russian psychic attack. Purging mankind of their temptations for sin. Self-determinism the technology offers. Perfection of ourselves by our own definitions. Expands these ideas. Investment opportunities. The technology allows for replays of memories with emotional content. Depending on conditions, this is better than a home movie or photo album. An EEG recording of some other subject that suffered a heart attack who was taken by ambulance to a hospital was replayed for me. I felt the defibrillation paddles on me twice. I got to experience open heart surgery with a stroke after the anticoagulants were injected. You would think after that experience I would improve my lifestyle habits, but here I am living a sedentary lifestyle typing this book. This would be a revolutionary way to share memories with people and relive the happy moments in your past. The movie industry will completely change. They will be selling an interactive experience where the observer feels all the actor's emotions, including smells and other sensory perception. Gaming would become far more real where you can feel pain if you get shot. The porn industry will be out of control for sure. This technology just needs to be taken out of the weapons labs for society to begin building the good applications around it. Interactive movie creation. They can induce an instant dream state where all participants play a part in creating the dream-like movie. When conditions are right, you can be pulled into the Matrix completely. Electronic drugs. They have all the runaway drug addiction pathways mapped out. They can turn almost anyone into a homeless drug addict or groom them to be a mind-controlled politician. Addictions could be eliminated. Psychoactive mood-altering drugs could be administered by electromagnetics far more cheaply than by pharmaceuticals. Sexual orientation. This has been a sore topic for the military, so research into correcting the gay population has been of continued research interest. Self-deterministic programming. You decide who you want to be. Personality overlays. Direct implant of advertising. Neuropop was a company who was looking into directly implanting advertising using wireless brainwave modulation, but they disappeared. About every decade the masses become worried about subliminal controls, which caused laws to be passed that are supposed to prevent subliminal and hypnotic advertising. But the government clearly breaks these laws and nobody enforces them anymore. Philosophically speaking, what is the difference between a high-pressure salesman and subtle influences of advertising? Where do you draw the line? The Japanese have a technique called silent cassette, which is supposed to send subliminal psychotronic signals through a CRT tube. Supposedly, the Russians released the computer virus called Satan 666, that created heart arrhythmia psychotronic signals emitted by the computer monitor. There are other techniques that splice a fraction of the viewing screen every 25th frame so that only the subconscious mind pieces the whole image together. There are countless other methods that a search through the patent office turns up. Sounds futuristic and like science fiction, but it has been a science fact since the early 60s. The science is being hoarded as a torture, interrogation, mind-probing and manipulation tool for the DOD. Sadly, they have done far more damage to this country through their secrecy than good. Now they feel they have abused it too much to come clean. They will shred documents like the CIA Director Helms did when the last investigation was ordered by Congress in the church hearings. The final destination. While the technology is extremely impressive, one has to judge the success of a project by the amount of resources it took to do it. When one takes into account the 60-plus years they have been working on it at a cost of hundreds of billions of dollars, with practically unlimited scientific expertise and non-consensual test humans for their data and no need to add the cascading costs of collateral damage of human suffering, it isn't so impressive. Perhaps the payback could justify it, the ends justifies the means mentality. However, they have no intention of releasing their data and methods to the public for all the positive benefits this would have on mankind. Overall, it is the biggest failure of a weapons project in human history when judged as a whole. What I am doing to save the world and our Constitution. Many victims of the weapons testing are denied the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness and even a means to earn a living due to the debilitating effects of microwave hearing harassment, drug experimentation, radiation experimentation, and brain manipulation experiments. So, I am hoping that the thousands of victims will sell this book door to door. They can earn a small income and raise awareness about the atrocities and brutality that plague our system, as I suspect that publication and distribution may prove difficult through normal channels who know the secret rules and limitations of the right to free speech. I am working with several other scientists in acquiring military-grade radar and directed energy equipment so as to demonstrate to the public conclusively how the system functions. Groups in the government use the catch-all funding phrase, "We need to keep up with the Russians to justify development of mind-influencing technologies." However, if they were really concerned that the Russians or Chinese could launch an attack on the United States at any time, they would have constructed zero-emission tempest shielding in the nuclear fallout shelters for the public. They have not. Clearly they are not interested in defense as much as offensive capabilities. So I am working with superconducting manufacturers, radar-absorbing material manufacturers, and new types of electromagnetic deflection material makers to create safe houses across the country for victims to seek shelter. I am designing ELF wave jammers and full-spectrum radar scramblers to disable the ability to see into buildings. If you are a high-net-worth individual, you may want to consider constructing a shelter to protect yourself from these new types of weapons. I imagine that business leaders and celebrities are of particular interest to the government for influencing their decisions and opinions. Many people will find that their lifelong tinnitus suddenly disappears in these expensive and carefully constructed shelters. Many people labeled schizophrenic suddenly have a recovery, and people with unexplainable pain with no physical underlying pathology are miraculously healed. To learn more about these shelters, visit www.thematrixdeciphered.com. Charitable donations to support our research and the Civil Informational War Campaign for Truth, contact Angelic Harp Foundation. Prediction of future government lies. When the superconductor and zero-M tempest standard shelters begin to pop up around the world and thousands of people begin to be miraculously cured, expect the disinformation agents to come up with all sorts of explanations to hide the grim truth. When victims of these tests first started talking publicly, they described how power lines, TV monitors, and appliances caused them pain. The government stepped in and labeled these people electromagnetically sensitive. I suspect they will say the same thing. It is impossible for the general M pollution we are bathed in to cause the described effects simply because a specific informational coherent M energy is necessary to influence the brain's electricity of the target. That is just astronomically improbable that general M pollution could cause these symptoms. Pay close attention to the pattern of lies and who says them. Strange days. We have some strange days in the decades to come. People will need to come to grips with the reality that the United States government has been torturing people to death using EEG heterodyning and other directed energy weapons for many decades. People will have to come to accept that their soul is entirely contained in the electrical signals of the brain. People will come to learn that the technological singularity we should all have had intense open debate about before it happened, has come and gone. The human mind has been fully deciphered and mapped. Machine intelligence is exceeding human intelligence. People will need to redefine themselves and rebuild a moral and justice framework that includes multiple mind intent. We have the power to be our own God and create ourselves as we wish if the technology is ever released to the public, empowering self-determinism like never imagined. Of course, the other scenario could happen, and people around the world become more influenced and deceived to the point of never coming back to reality. Hypnotized in the Matrix and commanded subliminally by invisible electronic signals from Tammy could become a dark permanent reality for the masses. Back at port. I must leave you here to journey on your own. For I have been forbidden to venture further by tortures that the common man could not endure. I bid you safe travels in your quest for truth, justice, and a prosperous future for humankind. May Apollo smite those that worship the gods of war. This is the end. I have taken you on a scary odyssey of truth. I have tried to help you understand what the Matrix is and is not. But now I must leave you here for you to make your decision. Do you choose, or would you prefer just to understand the choices made for you? As with Alice, we followed the CIA white rabbit down to the end of the rabbit hole which led us to a virtual hell. Deeper we descended, more stupidity and human ugliness we encountered. We battled the PSYCHL ops to uncover their methods of manipulation and encountered the subhumans used to collect the data. The mind control programs let us meet the Mad Hatter and understand the CIA's 30-year journey into madness. We got to see the distorted views from electromagnetic dreams of visual deception engineered from the top-secret Air Force labs. And finally, from our vantage point, we see the massive military machine that will drive the human race over the proverbial evolutionary cliff due to our leaders' myopia. You probably wished you had taken the blue pill, don't you? Wake up, world, an eye is upon you. The final riddle. In order to ask me a question, you must first answer me this riddle, and then perhaps your question will change. You are silently assassinated and are standing at the decision point for your eternity. There are two doors. One leads to heaven and one leads to hell. There are two figures standing beside the doors and they both look like angels. However, one is Satan's minion. He always lies and that door leads to hell. The saint at the other door always tells the truth and that door leads to heaven. You get one question. What question can you ask either of them to be able to decide your fate? Thanks. I want to thank all the weapons testing and torture testing victims around this country and other countries for their time and information. Ironically, I need to thank the weapons testers and their guilty conscience for filling in many of the details on the political solutions, limitations of the software algorithms and the science behind these fascinating weapons. I especially applaud the patriotic and noble ex-CIA and ex-FBI agents that have come forward with their confirmation of the continuation of the ultra mind control programs. We have a chance to win back America's freedom, dignity, and sanity by exposing and eliminating the military uses of these weapons. Thereby, usher in a new dawn for the mankind. Post-mortem debriefing. I know this book has pissed off many communities, especially those who enjoyed their secrecy to make themselves feel special, from secret societies, CIA, Black Ops. Politicians, the last few presidents, various inept government agencies, the Pentagon, psychiatrists, psychologists, parapsychologists, psychics, some religions, my family, overly ignorant flag-waving Americans, some traitorous colonels, to a few Nazi doctors. But I am cool with the Scientologists. Please don't pull my book from the libraries or bookshelves. Obviously, I can't be trusted with secrets, so don't tell me any. My predictions of the reprisals on me for writing this book. After this book gets published, attempts at discrediting me and further destruction of my life will be made. Expect rumored slander by the disinformation machine to kick into overdrive. I expect, rather than solving the problem and admitting wrongdoing, the entities and people responsible will be busy pointing their finger and covering their secret bases. What warfare will be initiated on me from divulging the plans of the idiots and puppets in power, 24 years early? I expect they will use the plausible denial method. I expect to be set up for any number of legal issues that may land me in a secret trial and secret prison. Perhaps they can brand me as a terrorist because I spend time reproducing microwave brain modulation techniques, EEG mind influencing and reading technologies, and electromagnetic pulse projects in hopes of demonstrating and helping the public understand these science fiction directed energy weapons. I expect to be silently assassinated by the system Satan, silent assassination through amplification of neurons, or one of the many other methods that look like natural causes: heart attack, car crash, cancer, or like in Olson's case maybe dosed with LSD, hammered in the back of the head, and thrown out of a 14-story building to look like a suicide. President Bush apologized for the CIA doing this. At least 2 other scientists who worked on the integration of UK/US Navy NATO systems who know nuclear submarine signatures and the capabilities of the global surveillance systems including SIGINT, SIGCOM, HARP, and electronic warfare have perished in unexplainable suicides, so I should not expect anything less. Most frightening of all is I know they have fully mapped my mind and have demonstrated incomprehensible control over my thoughts and actions. Although they have stopped on the 1-year anniversary of my ordeal, they could suddenly take control again. But they can't do any of these things until this book is published, then my work is done. I have to the best of my abilities described their methods, strategies, and technologies. I have told you how to protect yourselves and how to restore a true democracy and freedom of thought and expression. It is you, the reader, that must act not as an individual but as an ambassador for the entire human race, representing all the people who cannot understand what is being done to them and their children's future. You are now a soldier in this informational civil war, one of the truly enlightened, who must help us fight the forces of ignorance and darkness hiding behind the shroud of secrecy which are currently prevailing. Stay tuned. As with any book, there will be errors, but this is certainly good enough for government work. I or someone else will publish corrections on the website. Remember, don't fall for the method of discrediting. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Truth is a triangulation process of increasing the precision of the model representing it. Our goal is to continue the process of reaching high-order models of understanding and disseminating the knowledge as efficiently as possible to the collective intelligence of the people. Posted by Special Forces Sentinel at 10:12 a.m. http://THOUGHTLESSNESS23.blogspot.mx/2010/11/matrix-deciphered.html